Hello and welcome once again to the final, for now, episode of GM Tips, covering Rise of the Runelords. I'm your lovely GM Jason, and these are a new set of tips than were here, well, technically 2 weeks ago, because my schedule got fucked up last week. Sure, let's go ahead and just get started. You guys know the drill by now, I assume, unless you've for some reason jumped in on the final book, in which case go back and watch the other ones. So yeah, let's go ahead and get into it. So this is book 6 of Rise of the Runelords, titled The Spires of Xin-Shalast, or I guess it's just Spires of Xin-Shalast. I keep saying the, because it feels like it wants a the, but there's no the. Here you can see we've got our nice little rune giant friend. One of the many nameless rune giants that appear in this book. They've got kind of cool samurai themed armor that also doesn't really come up or get explained. But yeah, they look cool. I like how they look. I should have brought the minis. I have the full Rise of the Runelords minis set that I got at some point last year up from like WizKids on sale. And it's got a huge rune giant mini, and it's pretty cool. I love it. But yeah, all right, let's get into it. So, like I usually start with, let's go over our villains. Surprise, it's Karzoug! Finally, the party actually gets to, hopefully, deal with Karzoug, the Rune Lord of Greed. He is the antagonist, the secret antagonist behind all of the events of all of the books so far. And this is the first Rune Lord to rise, and the first one, hopefully, to fall, should your players do things right. So the thing is about Karzoug is, I think he's interesting, but the information that the players get by default is very limited. I think, so just my general thoughts on Karzoug, I think he's got a pretty interesting backstory. I feel like it's pretty sympathetic, somewhat heroic, fairly it bleeds into anti-heroism, I guess. But he's born into slavery, he learned magic in secret, kind of stole it from his, from the lich that he had been born to serve under. Manages to escape that life via cunning trickery, and eventually rises up to become the most powerful Rune Lord of them all. And that's a cool story, right? Like, that's interesting. The party doesn't really have much reason to ever learn it, as written, but we'll get to that. But he's got like a kind of literal rags to riches life story there. He's not born into wealth himself. He makes it all on his own, with his own two hands. And one thing you'll probably notice if you're the GM is that he's kind of, Rise of the Runelords is sort of meant to be this kind of like, baby's first adventure. It's got a little bit of everything, and what better to complete that with than a maniacal villain who's just evil for evil's sake. If you're like me, you probably want a little bit more than he's just evil. Lol, he just wants to kill, he just wants to rule. So I like to think about why he loves greed so much, why has he dedicated his life to this, and why he's going through this like immense scheme to come back after being gone from the world for 10,000 years. And like what he thinks he's going to do with that power, regardless of whether or not he is ever actually going to achieve that. I think thinking about these sort of things can give you a little bit more roleplay fodder when you have him talk to the players, when the players want to talk to him, when the players are trying to figure out what he's doing, what his mindset is. It's a lot more interesting to RP if you kind of have some better idea of what he's going through. So based on his backstory, I kind of paint him as a really strong proponent of the whole idea of a meritocracy, of survival of the fittest, and a big proponent of capitalism. Though Karzoug himself was a victim of a hyper-capitalist world where he was even allowed to be born into slavery, he manages to escape that and then when he rises to the top of that, and then believes that he needs to pull the ladder up from everyone else. That it was his, because he was able to become so powerful, he now feels like he needs to kind of like inflict that pain that he experienced to everyone else down the tree. That if they want to become as powerful as him, or that everyone else who became as powerful as he is now basically did the same thing, and that it's like a rite of passage, and that truthfully in his view, it should be the case that only the people who actually deserve to be at the top are actually at the top. And that, I think that's a good way of sort of framing his mindset. The real villain was capitalism along the way. Capitalism is the bad guy. I knew it. Yep. I think it works the guy's theme is greed, right? So what more greed can you get than hypercapitalism? I think these are all like pretty interesting worldviews that kind of dovetail nicely together with themselves, and kind of help mold your thinking around like what he's up to. And I like the extra angle of him being so greedy that he wants all the greed to himself. A big part of his resurrection scheme is that he needs to kill off all of these greedy people who are marked with the Sahedron so that he can steal their power. Or like steal power from their spirits. And you'd think that might leave him with like very few minions to go around with, but does he want minions in the long run? I don't know if he really cares or should care about his army, about Lucretia, about Zanisha, about Sioptra, Kalib, any of them. I think it's much more interesting if he's really just using them to serve his own means. Which means he's also probably willing to use the party to serve his own means. Which means that he should be at least somewhat open to negotiation, at least from he views himself as being in a position of power, so he's not going to bargain with the NPCs with the PCs rather, to get his way, but he should be willing to attempt to hire the PCs, to try to convince them that he is right, and that, because, in his mind, it'd be weird, I think, for him to think of himself as a villain in this story. I think he should probably think he's the hero. Sort of worldviews that you can look at are, authoritarianism and populism. I think he probably believes that he is his own hero, or like he is the world's hero, that he has got something that only he can do, and that's why he wants to rise back into power and prominence. You could say that that's maybe a little bit more pride, but I think all the Runelords are a bit prideful in some respects. So the sins thing doesn't quite perfectly line up, but I think he's got a lot of, he's just got to have some degree of overconfidence in himself and his own worldview, I think, to get to where he is. Sort of related to that, everyone below him should either be like a grifter, a sycophant, or like a bitter authoritarian who's just wanting to kind of get revenge on society at large that has mistreated them, or like they feel like they can ride Karzoug's coattails into some era where they will become powerful. Or they could just be people that have, or creatures that have just been duped by his charisma. He is a relatively, he was a massive, powerful leader in the world. Like, he should be somewhat charismatic, I think. Is Karzoug Elon Musk with a better backstory? Yeah, kinda. He's actually smart, though. At least to some extent. Like, Karzoug actually teaches himself real magic. I don't think that's something that Mr. Musk can do. Not in his wildest dreams. So with all that said, what is Karzoug's remaining set of forces at this point? We have, as we will learn, in the Pinnacle of Avarice, a group of allies have been released from stasis by Mokmurian prior to the whole adventure starting. These include Kalib, his top apprentice, the Most High Seoptra, who is the leader of the Lamia, or the Lamia in this story, rather. I don't know if there's other cultures of Lamia out there, but she's the boss of Karzoug's Lamia. An unknown number of Lamia, which does actually include Lucretia and Zanisha. I think I said in a prior video I wasn't sure whether or not Lucretia and Zanisha were part of this group that had been in stasis, but I confirmed in the book they are. And then a total of 35 rune giants that were all held in stasis at the Pinnacle of Avarice. Meant to be trapped there for only 100 years, ended up getting stuck there for 10,000. We also have, trapped in the past, at Riddleport, getting ready to go through a time portal to the present day, is Karzoug's army of old. It's largely rune giants and other giantkin. They're basically just waiting for the portal to activate once Karzoug is returned to the present, and they're siphoning off some energy to kind of come through to the current day. The party will hopefully eventually find that out and give them more incentive to do certain things in the adventure. And then we have all of the kind of new cast of characters that have been added to Karzoug's forces in basically within the span of like just before the adventure starting. These are the denizens of Ling, who previously had been working with Karzoug on this entire plan in the first place, but I believe, I'm not 100% sure, but I believe the idea is that when Earthfall happens, they just peace out and don't bother helping until Mokmurian shows up again and sort of kicks things off again. I'm not really sure why they don't come back. They seem pretty invested in this. Yeah, that one's a bit of a plot hole. Don't think about that too much, I guess. Let's just say that they were there and now they're back. They're inscrutable anyway, who knows? The party would have to try to talk to them to find out where they went in the meantime, and it doesn't really matter. There's also Karzoug's new army, which is basically all of the new giants and Lamia kin that have been recruited thanks to basically Mokmurian's efforts trying to unite the giant peoples. There's Viorin Decanti, who is a random woman from Riddleport, I think. She's just a random mercenary who had the Sword of Chellan in her family's possession for a long time. When Karzoug reawakened, or Karzoug's Runewell reawakened, so did the sword, and it basically possessed slash turned her into a sycophant and brought her here to Xin-Shalast. Then we have Glorifex, the ancient blue dragon, who's just kind of, I think he just heard that that Karzoug likes blue dragons a lot and is pretty much just a big fan of Karzoug's, I guess, and came to Xin-Shalast to try and worm his way up to a seat alongside Karzoug's throne. Then we have Gamigan, the Ice Devil Assassin, who's just been he was already using the kind of unoccupied Xin-Shalast as a little bit of a hideout for thousands of years, while he's been doing other kind of silly assassination stuff. And Karzoug has recently recruited him via some intermediaries just because it's fun. And then the Hidden Beast. Similarly, as this is a strange being that the Spared, I think, accidentally release, who had been trapped under Xin-Shalast for eons, and he's just a weird octopus guy, or decapus guy rather. And I think Karzoug has recently recruited the Hidden Beast as well, but he's not really doing much. He's just kind of chilling. So. All right, that's kind of like all the enemies that the party will face in this chapter, or that Karzoug has left. You may not want to fight all of them. Sort of up to you how you run this, but so let's go ahead. So the path to the end of the game. So from this point, the party has just gotten back from Runeforge. They have learned some critical information. They have obtained, hopefully, at least one weapon that will work against the forces of greed. And be super effective against Karzoug. And now they just got to find the guy. So first, they need to find a lead. That lead should lead them to the Kodar Mountains, where they need to find the Vekker cabin. From the Vekker cabin, they will basically get clued in to follow the River Ava. From the River Ava, they will make their way up to Lower Xin-Shalast, which is like a bulk of the book. From there, they have to climb up through Upper Xin-Shalast, through the summit, or to reach the summit where the Spires are, force their way into the Pinnacle of Avarice past the occluding field, and then once they've cleared out the Pinnacle of Avarice and dealt with the Lang device, they can go safely into the Eye of Avarice and defeat Karzoug once and for all. So that's kind of the high-level overview of what's going on. So, Seeking Xin-Shalast, this is the part 1 of the book as presented in the book. So let's start with building tension. This is the end game. This is the final big arc of the story, so I think it's important that you start to kind of ramp up the kind of tension and stakes a little bit. I like to use environmental cues here to signal that this is the end. In my last game, I had the sky turn green. You could make it turn gold or some other color. Shortly after returning from the Runeforge, occasional earthquakes, like small minor earthquakes that just kind of give off a spooky vibe is good. You can have wildlife going silent. Anything you've seen in movies or other media or books that kind of imply that, ooh, everything feels unsettled, I think is sort of good to pull out of your pocket here. The world should feel a bit not at ease. And the kind of sudden change after the party is done will give everyone like a sense of relief that some great evil has passed. And it also helps later on that once it's done, then the party feels like even more like heroes, that they've like prevented some world-ending calamity that's occurring, even if it's not really threatening the world that much. Whether or not Karzoug is a major threat to the world at large is a little bit open to interpretation, but it should certainly feel like it is. So prophetic dreams, I think, are also a good option if you want to do some foreshadowing. If either Lucretia or Zanisha are alive, or if you just want your enemy Lamia to do it, I like casting Nightmare to kind of taunt the PCs a little bit. It's also fun to just have them randomly start their day with fatigue if they fail their saves. It's a nice little trick. As long as the enemy knows their names, they can cast it, which is pretty cool. It's a little handy little trick you can use. And it's like a fairly mild effect. It's just fatigue. You can do it on days where they're not really, where they're just like traveling or something, and it won't really matter. But it does feel annoying, and it makes the party want to stop it. Players, ultimately, they should feel that Karzoug's return is imminent, but never should feel like it is tomorrow. If they feel like it is too urgent, they are going to try to stop everything they're doing to go do it. They're going to make a lot of, we'll call them suboptimal decisions in haste. You don't ever quite want them to get to that point. You still want them to sort of play the game at a normal pace. You just don't want them to feel like nothing bad is going to happen if they just, I don't know, take the year off to go tour the world or something, right? It should feel like Karzoug is threat, like if they take their eyes off him, he could come back at any point. So we're just trying to get the party to stay on the course, stay engaged with the storyline, and not try to wander off too far. He should basically be, once they reach the Pinnacle of Avarice, he should be only a few days away from revival. And once they actually reach the entrance to the Eye, they should basically realize like, oh no, he's got like a day left. But you don't need to plot out a very specific timeline for this. You can kind of keep it vague. When I last ran it, I was keeping track of the days the entire time. And I actually really wanted to make it so that his return was scheduled for the final day of the year. But the party took a little bit too long and kind of blasted past it and ended up, I feel like they made it to him like part of the way through Abadar's month. It was like halfway through the equivalent of January, sadly. Some of us need to craft. Yeah, I know. But that's what I mean. Like, don't. I had a plan that I thought was cool, but I relented when I saw that. Like, no, I think they're gonna. I think they would appreciate more time to do a little bit of downtime, a little bit of crafting, a little bit more a slower pace. I think it worked. You don't need extreme tension. You just need enough tension to make things interesting. And yeah, if at any point the players start to freak out or assume that things are going to that he's gonna like suddenly appear at any day now and they gotta run, feel free to make them do skill checks. I wouldn't even make them do skill checks. You could probably just have them like read the air, or you can kind of feed them the information that like, no, you don't think it's gonna happen too soon, but it is coming. Use your own discretion with how much information you want to give there. Again, you're just trying to kind of hint that things are happening, but not go overboard. Okay, so connecting the dots. So the last book was already a little bit of a stretch, that the party needed to go to the Rune Forge before going to Xin-Shalast. Again, you're going to need to kind of connect things to get them to go from, hey, we got the stuff in Rune Forge, to we need to go find Karzoug. And exactly, if you've done a good job of like explaining why they can't just find Xin-Shalast, then by this point you need to have given them a way to find Xin-Shalast. So I like to use Vraxaris's notes for this. You can edit them, you can add way more content to them. I think that's the easiest thing to do because the party just can't miss Vraxaris's notes. They basically have to get them as part of creating an anti-greed weapon. You could hide this information in other Runeforge documents that you homebrew. It's sort of up to you. You could just spell it out if you want. The book has a sort of default way of having Brodert Quink tell the party about a letter he got about the Veckers. That's a possibility, but it relies on the party returning to Sandpoint first, so you might need to do ascending. And then there is the Thoracic Library back in Jorgenfist, but you probably need some kind of quick transportation method to do that. Otherwise, it's probably going to take a long time to fly there and fly to the next spot. So I like Vraxaris's notes. I think that's the simplest way. Just expand them a little bit, and add the appropriate details. So the things that the party should actually find out here at this point is that Karzoug's ritual should be tied to his, or is probably tied to his rune well, that the party would like to find his rune well, and that the rune well is almost certainly in Xin-Shalast. That's where any old document should basically be able to say that he had a rune well and it was in Xin-Shalast. They should already kind of know that Xin-Shalast is somewhere in the Kodar Mountains, and information should mention a river Ava. That river name might not exist in current times, and the river itself is like a phantom river. So they shouldn't be able to just go out and like find it directly. They need to find this Vecker cabin first. So they should also know that the city has some kind of protecting ward called the occluding field, or the occlusion field, that fucks with teleportation and divination. This, I think, gets sort of obliquely mentioned in Vraxaris's notes, but you can make it a little bit more explicit if you want. It says that it blocks his, or he says that he wasn't able to get in through the occluding field while he was astral projecting. So he can kind of theorize about some of its properties in those notes, and that can give the players a little bit more context to why they might not be able to just warp right in. And they should also learn that the location that Mhar Massif has some kind of ties to the Dreamlands, aka Ling, aka Realm of Nightmares or Dreams or whatever you want to call it. And that there's some kind of ritual that is required to reach Xin-Shalast. No documents should really say what the ritual is, but imply that there is some special method. And then the last thing that they need to know is that a group of dwarves, the Vekkers, had recently claimed to have been to Xin-Shalast and were attempting a second try to go back. I believe Broderick Quink's letter it's the simplest wording of it, but it relies on getting back to Broderick Quink. What I like to do is I just put this information in Vraxaris's notes. When he does his little astral projection trip, I just have him run into the Vekkers along the way and see them coming back from Xin-Shalast with some excitement. And that way, all he has to do is like catch their name or something about them, and that can be enough to get the party to go investigate who these dwarves might be. You could also rely on local rumors, to supply this info if you want, depending on if the party goes back to a town first. But yeah, so reasons why Xin-Shalast is hard to get into. It needs to be obvious, or you should be clear that, or it should be clear to you, rather, the GM, that you can't just kind of fly out to the Kodar Mountains, look at Xin-Shalast, and go straight there. If you could, then it would sort of bypass a lot of it would sort of bypass the reason to go to the Runeforge, it would sort of bypass the reason to do this sort of earlier part of this adventure. It's sequenced in this way, so you kind of need to make excuses for it. The excuses are there, they're a little scattered in the book, so I kind of wanted to collect them. So first off, again, the Dreamland shenanigans make it weird to find or see. It seems like you're not even able to see it without the next bullet point, which is you need some kind of intense hunger, aka a greed, to be able to even see the phantom river of Ava. And probably, I just extend that to the entire city. That like, you need to, once you have this hunger and you start following the river, you pass a point at which you maybe no longer need that hunger, but you're now kind of on the track. This hunger is triggerable by starvation, which is how the Vekkers find it in the first place, and is what they're going to learn when they interact with the Vekker cabin. The occluding field, again, is something that protects the Pinnacle, and what I do is, it's actually, the way it's written is that it only protects the Pinnacle of Avarice itself. I actually just extend that to be kind of the whole mountain to some extent. I think this gives it a little bit more of a kind of final zone feel to it if things feel a little bit weird. You might not want to do this if you've got party members that are really highly reliant on teleportation and divination stuff, but I think it's fun, I think it's interesting. So it's up to you whether or not you want to go with it. But the occluding field at the actual peak explicitly just blocks teleportation, divination, and any kind of like astral projection and ethereal magic from working from the outside, I think, into the occlusion field. And if you go in and you're not wearing a Sahedron ring or medallion, you take continual damage. Or something equivalent. You suffer some adverse effects when you go inside, or you're completely blocked from going inside. Sort of up to you. I forget what the actual ruling is. Just do whatever you feel is interesting. I go for just continuous mental damage. I think that's fine. The party shouldn't really be going inside without having rings on anyway. Or I also allow a Runeforged weapon that is specifically attuned against greed also suffices as a way to bypass the damage part of the occlusion field. You could also have that bypass the other effects of the occlusion field as well, the divination and the all of the magic blocking stuff. I didn't do that last time, but you could. And then what I do for the lesser occluding field, I basically just extend that out to the lower city as well of Xin-Shalast. And I have that just cause teleportation, divination, and projection magic to just randomly fail or be kind of staticky. if you if you're a GM that likes to fudge sometimes, you can use it to prevent any kind of like cheesing strats. Like if the party wants to, I don't know, teleport away, like back to town and teleport back. Like if they don't just want to like keep doing teleport shenanigans, you can stop that this way, or make it inconvenient. Like they have to leave the city first and then do it. And it generally, I think it helps kind of hint at the properties of the actual, like the real occlusion field at the top. I keep saying occlusion field. I think it's easier to say than occluding field. I think it's actually called occluding field because that's what I wrote here, but whatever. And yeah, I also allow the effects to be kind of diminished while the party's underground, because there's a whole network of tunnels that the Spared use, and I like to encourage the party to work with the Spared and use the Spared's help. This, by traveling a lot underground, you avoid a lot of the kind of what I feel are sort of mandatory random encounters that you need to be doing if the party's just wandering the streets of Xin-Shalast. If the party wanders the streets of Xin-Shalast and doesn't get random encounters, then it sort of feels like there's no real threat there, which it's kind of my one exception to normally I say don't do random encounters, but it's like the final city. It's supposed to be controlled by the enemy. It's supposed to be filled with hostile forces. It would be really weird if the party just kind of was able to freely walk around with no kind of penalty or punishment, or with no trouble, right? Like they should at least need to be using invisibility or special spells or something to kind of cloak their movements. And the underground tunnels are an alternative to using magic, basically, and are sort of a reward for helping the Spared. Okay, I'm getting kind of ahead of myself and behind myself, jumping around a little bit mentally, just because there's a lot of stuff in this book. It's all sort of relevant for almost the entirety of the book. And there's a lot of kind of thinking ahead you have to do in this one. I highly recommend kind of reading through this section all the way through once before you start to run it, just because it's a lot of stuff to keep track of. It's very easy to like miss some detail or like forget about the occlusion field or something that can kind of mess with the like story experience on the player's side. So I think it's easier if you try to like keep things as tightly weaved together as possible. It's sort of the kind of, I guess it's the downside of this book, is that they took so long to, you have 5 books where you don't really learn a lot of details about the kind of end game of Karzoug's plan and what's going on. And once you get to book 6, they just kind of throw it all at you. So it's a lot of information to kind of sort through and make sure you've got arranged properly and make sure it makes sense, at least for your own game's internal logic. Alternatively, if your party members don't care and aren't paying that close enough attention, it doesn't really matter. You can just do whatever. But I have like a personal need to make things internally consistent. So it's if you're like me and you feel the urge to do that, it's just something you'll have to do, is make sure you read everything and sort of know what's going on here. So anyway, weather and environment. This book takes place entirely in the mountains, very cold. Double check all of your rules. Make sure you've got like a game plan for for a lot of the different sort of environmental challenges that you expect the players to run into. They're different in 2E than you would run them in 1E. It depends, really. Look through the environmental rules of your particular game, figure out which ones you want to use, which ones you don't. Some of them are a little bit annoying. The main thing that is kind of missing from 2E that's present in 1E is acclimation to lesser levels of oxygen at higher altitudes. In first edition, there's a whole mechanic of like, once you're there for a week, you get used to it, sort of thing. And before that, I forget exactly how the fatigue thing works, but they have rules for that in first edition. They don't really have that in second edition. When I ran it in second edition, I basically just said for flavor that characters' breaths were, or that could feel the lower oxygen in the lower city, but once they got to the upper city, that's when suffocation started to happen. And that worked well enough. As long as it's like, I wouldn't leave it out entirely. As long as you kind of incorporate these things into the feel of the adventure. Like, this whole section is supposed to be very snowy, remote, dangerous environment. It would be a shame to not use anything snow-themed or mountain environment-y. Don't just let it be another set of like forests and trails that the party just kind of waltzes through. Like, it should have snow. It should have ultra cold temperatures. Make the party use endure elements and things that they normally wouldn't bother casting. It flavors the adventure more. Let's see. There's some other notes on here that you can read if you want, I suppose. Worth noting, there are elevations listed for various places in Mhar Massif across the book. I found it helpful to go find all those locations where they've written that out and just make my own little elevation chart. Some of it you'll have to decide for yourself because they're a little bit vague about where certain elevation transitions are. But I found it helpful to like be able to describe to the party that way, like what elevation they were at, or to just know myself what elevation they were at and how close they were to the death zone, which is at a certain height. I forget what number it is. I should have written it down, but you think I'd remember it by now. But yeah, so the scenario should feel different. It should feel like they're in a new location. It shouldn't feel like the sort of normal summer climate or fall climate they've been in. But don't go too overboard with the rules. Yeah, that's sort of my thoughts on it. Okay, and this is also their kind of last big rest stop. It's their last chance to... sorry, what was that? Joey asks, who would build a capital city of a greed empire in such a climate? Karzoug. The answer is Karzoug. I don't know if it was that cold back then, but also it's a combination of it being really cold and at this point in the adventure, it should be winter. It should be like the middle of winter. Hopefully your party has not taken that long. I believe the Swallowtail Festival is supposed to take place like in like November-ish, like kind of late fall. So it should, if you're going at a sort of reasonable pace, it should be in the kind of December to December to February kind of months by the time they reach this point. So it would be just very cold, and it's also kind of in the northern part of the world. Also, I guess Karzoug didn't build the city himself. It was already there before he got there, so you'll have to ask Xin and his followers. I forget who the first one was. The first Runelord of greed / benevolence. But in any case, so yeah, this is their last chance to get any supplies, spend all their gold. Really, tell them to spend all their gold. They're not going to get to use gold anymore. There is very little reason for them to be holding on to money at this point. Make it very clear that this is the final bit. You're going on a big expedition. Be prepared. Related, you probably want to close out any of the characters' sort of personal quests they might still have going on. Double check the party's wealth, as I've mentioned before. Make sure items are distributed. If you need to, you can give out extra rewards to the players to kind of close the gaps. I think if the party rescued people from Jorgenfist, I think mailed in rewards like extra gold from thankful parties could be very helpful there. And yeah, generally the party should be gathering like some mountaineering supplies, rations, any kind of cold weather gear they need, and doing any kind of final downtime stuff that they want to do, like any last minute retraining or crafting before the final act. They're probably the easiest places to go to are Sandpoint, and just because they like going there a lot, probably, and Riddleport, which just happens to be closer to the entrance to Runeforge. They could potentially go to Magnamar if they really want to, but at this point, Riddleport's probably equivalent in terms of like size and item quality. Yanderhof is also mentioned as being a location that the Vekkers are from. So you could have the party go there instead. It's one of the Sky Citadels. I don't know much about it personally, and I think it's actually really far south on the map. So it'd be quite a journey to go from Riddleport area all the way to Yanderhof and then up to Xin-Shalast. So they're probably not going to go there, but it's an option, especially if you've got some dwarves. Maybe it would make sense if you just wanted to go to a new location. Sorry, let me have a sip of water. Okie doke. Let's see. Anything else from here? No, I think that's basically it. Does Yanderhof make more sense for a party with teleportation? Potentially, though I think most teleport spells kind of require you to know where you're going. Like, teleport itself, I think, needs you to know where you're going. So, unless your party knows Yanderhof for some other reason, maybe they could use it. Or, like, they probably just wouldn't really need to go there. Yeah, I'd have to double check the map to see exactly where it is. I don't have it in front of me or nearby. Yeah, I'm not sure. I just figured I'd mention it because the book brings it up. It is technically there, and there's some connection to the events that are about to happen. But it's pretty mild. Okay. Oh, I didn't really mention it. Adam did want me to bring it up at some point, but there is I guess it's worth mentioning that if you've, I mean, it's sort of late for me to mention at this point, but tracking your party's wealth can kind of, like, you can offload that to your players themselves in a way. It depends on it really depends on what style of players you've got, whether or not any kind of additional tracking is useful. If your players sort of naturally share things evenly, then you don't really need much of a system. For the most recent game, the party had like a kind of group spreadsheet where they were putting any items they found and sort of buying stuff out of it. From their own sort of gold pool, and that way they could split items a little bit more evenly, and keep the gold relatively equal across characters. I don't think that's strictly necessary to do. It's sort of, it really depends on like how fair you feel like you need to be to the party members. To some extent, money that goes to one character should be helping all characters, so it's not really necessary to go that far, but that's a tool if you feel like you need it or could benefit from it. For the most part, when it comes to like making sure characters are sort of evenly geared, you really can just like look at a character's sheet, see what stuff they're actually using, and sort of judge it based on that. And otherwise, when you give people gold, I think it's usually fair to just let the party just get all of the gold evenly, and then do any kind of item splits as the party decides to give them away. But yeah, it's sort of up to you. I don't know if there's any kind of real science to how to split gear and stuff. If you've got really greedy players in this adventure about greed, then you might need to do a little bit more hand-holding. I haven't generally had players that were like hoarding the rest of people's items in a long time. I feel like that's more of a sort of newer player approach to the game. Like if you had newer rogues, it's always the rogue players, man. It's always the rogue players who want to steal everyone's money and be the richest in the party and never spend anything. But I feel like at this point, I just don't run into that much. So it's up to you. Figured I'd mention it, though. In any case, Whispers in the Wind, which is the next part of the book. The problematic part. Yay! We all love problematic stuff, don't we? So, the Windwalkers. These are a creature this is a creature that is based on or inspired by Native American / First Nations traditions, folklore, and stories. In some cultures, it's worth noting that even saying the creature's actual name is taboo. That's why I'm not saying it out loud. Not that I particularly believe in it. It's just a thing that is it's disrespectful in their culture to say it, so I just choose not to say it. There is a lot of discourse online about whether or not you should even use these creatures, whether or not you can or should say the name, whether or not it matters, whether it's appropriation, or if it's just representation. I've heard both sides of this from both people who are part of Native nations and people who are not, and it is really complicated, largely because Native Americans are not one big monolith, so it's hard. You might ask one person from one nation and they could give you a completely different answer on this than someone from another nation. Some are totally fine with discussing and sharing information about this. Others are not. And that actually adds to the kind of difficulty in researching the topic of this creature entirely, is that First Nations don't like to talk about it. Because talking about it itself is a taboo. So it's really hard to look up any information on this subject. You'll just kind of find threads of people hand-wringing over it. I'm sort of hand-wringing over it right now, I suppose, but from how it's used in the adventure path, I don't think it's a terribly disrespectful use case in the adventure path as written. It's placed there as a warning against greed. It is the Vekkers become hunted by and turn into these Windwalker creatures as a result of their extreme greed and wanting to basically strip Xin-Shalast bare after they find it. They are sort of punished by the story and by these creatures and become cannibals as a result. And that's fairly in line with how the sort of traditional stories about these seem to go, as far as I can kind of collect. Again, it's sort of limited. I think it's more interesting to keep it there personally, because, how often do you get to learn about sort of Native American folklore and history as part of any media at all? But I can totally see and understand why you might just want to remove it entirely out of respect or just wanting to avoid the subject. I could also see how you might not care at all. And I can't really do anything about that. So it's your game. You know the people in your game and what their tastes are like, etc. If you want, you could just place this with generic ghosts or whites or what have you. That's fine. The role that these things play in the story is not so critical that you can't just remove them. So you could just skip it if you want. The entire Vekker cabin can just be skipped. You could find another way to communicate that the party needs to go to a specific location to find the rivers and what ritual they need to do to get there, or to find the city. Maybe they don't even need a ritual. It's up to you. I think someone asked last time if there were any more some kind of spooky sections. This is a spooky section. It's basically another haunted house. If you don't want to run a haunted house, again, you could also just skip this. Ultimately, what I decided to do last time, after sort of reading more into it, I like just keeping the representation in the game. I think it's interesting. I just stick with calling them Windwalkers instead of using their sort of actual name, which starts with a W. And I also integrate the Shoanti into it a little bit. If the players do a recall knowledge check, or if they have any Shoanti in the party, or if they get to talk to any Shoanti, nearby, then I mention that it's part of Shawanti legend, and we'll mention that it's also part of real life Native American legends, and mention that the sort of naming taboo is shared, and they just refer to it as a windwalker and that sort of thing. And I think that's a fairly safe way of dealing with it. It's safest to just not use it at all, I suppose, but I feel like that's personally, I feel like that's going a little bit far. I don't think there's a really a right answer to this. I don't think it's necessarily racist to use it either. So shrug, no good answer for this one. Do what you think is best. It's probably fine. Sorry, that was a lot of... thank you for appreciating my commitment to being an inclusive person. I try. I want to be included in things, and I like when other cultures get to be included too, so... I don't know. It's worth being careful about that sort of stuff. I just figured I'd bring it up based on the things I read about. I don't think it's a really cut and dry situation. It's complex, like real life. What you gonna do? So, the Vicar's Cabin itself, again, this is basically just a narrative haunted house, like with the Foxglove Manor. It's kind of run on a timetable, where once you arrive, you do a little bit of exploration. There's an event table that starts to trigger round by round. I actually like to run this entirely in counter mode if you can, or in a combat if you're in first edition. Even though there's no real combat happening for most of it, it's just kind of fun and spooky that way. It really adds to the tension. You can kind of shorten the round timers if you want, to sort of keep things a little bit faster paced. Depends on your party size. If you've got a really big party, you might not want to do that. But with smaller parties of 3 to 5, then I think it's reasonable to run it that way. You can kind of do stuff. You don't even have to do things on rounds. You can do things in between turns. You don't even really need to run the haunts as full-blown haunts. It's really up to you. It's kind of just I feel free to use it as just a loosey-goosey series of kind of weird events that happen that kind of tell a story of what's happened here, that these dwarves sort of succumbed to their greed and succumbed to their hunger. And yeah, the thing that they need to learn is that there's dangers to succumbing to your greed, and that greed, aka hunger, is the key to finding the River of the River Ava, which leads to Xin-Shalast. And I think they're also pointed in the direction of the river as a result of finding Silas's ghost. Which is one of the 2 dwarves. And there's both of our dwarves there. Look at them. Such brothers. The hunger is never ending? Yes, that is true. For third action, I reskinned, or tried to reskin all of this to be more relevant to our dwarf in the party. It ended up being a little convoluted, like many of my attempts to tie characters to stories, but I added a third character here that wasn't present in the original version of the story. But they're kind of they're not really relevant to the plot at large, so it's really easy to change what's going on here to fit whatever story you want. So again, yeah, very, very easy to tweak. Okay. On the world's roof. This is the sort of, it's a very small section of the book, but it is basically the following the River Ava up to Xin-Shalast. Oops, a bell has fallen and blocked our view of Svavenka. But yeah, so this is where the Queen of the Ice Mist is where we finally get some payoff for the Mirjana side quest back in book 3. She is the sister. I think she's the sister. Or she's some relative. Oh, where'd the bell fall from? It fell from the old bell tower back in book 2. The Shadow Tower. So she's a relative of Mirjana. If the party had interacted and helped Mirjana, then she should just immediately recognize the party and help them out. If they missed that, then this is probably something that you just either skip over or have be a mildly antagonistic sort of deal where she shows up to stop them from intruding on her lands, and maybe they work it out, maybe they don't. It's up to you. If you skip her, or the party fights and defeats her or something, or they piss her off, then you can just have Morgiv give basically all of the information that she would give instead. Or Gukak also is a reasonable choice. With a stone giant, air quotes, in the city. So there's other options for getting this information out, but she's an option for giving information to the party before they go into the city proper. She should probably try to direct the party to the Spared. I think that's what the book suggests as well. But she should direct them to the Spared first, as a sort of an easy kind of plot direction to go. Because Xin-Shalast itself is fairly open-ended, if you just let the party explore from the start, they might just have either option paralysis or not really know what they're trying to do. Giving them a point of contact in the city is a little bit more of a direct way of handling things. And yeah, she can warn about things like the occluding field, like the lack of oxygen at the summit. She can give them quite a lot of information. Basically, whatever you want her to know, she can know. She probably shouldn't know about the details of like Karzoug's army, or like about Karzoug and his plan, I suppose. But she can know about any of the sort of recent creatures that have been appearing, about glore effects, about anything, basically anything that she could know by wandering around. And also feel free to have her help the party in more direct ways. She could be this book's Shalelu if you want. I've never run her that way because the party's usually pretty competent by this point. But if you feel like the party could use an extra hand or like some bonus support, or some like primal spellcasting or something, feel free to have her be more supportive and more helpful in that way. I usually just kind of let her be a safe point that the party can retreat to, and a bunch of bonus information. And then we have the next section is kind of like getting into the city proper, following the rest of the River of Va. I guess, actually, that's one thing I didn't note here, that the river, I didn't put a map of the rivers and the way they worded it. I make the entire River of Va like a phantom river that they need to... I forget... Shit, there's another river. Oh, no, I have to go check the book. I don't remember these river names. Let's see if I can find it real quick. It's so big, though? That's what she said? Wait, what is so big? There's too much delay. I don't know what jokes are happening in chat. Please, explain the joke to me. Oh, the city! The city is so big! Ah, yes, okay. Thank you. Let's see. Yeah, okay. Here, I think I can sort of show. Will this show up on camera? Yeah, we've got these maps of northeastern Varizia. And it's hard to hold the book in one hand. This map here, it has the River of Va on it, I think. Yeah, it's the B point. I just make the entire River of Va invisible to the naked eye. Or an extension of the river is invisible. So that way the party just can't find it without going to the Vecker cabin first. And that makes a little bit more sense to me. Oh, right, it's off of the Kazaron River. Yeah, it's the Kazaron River, which branches into the River of Va, which branches itself into the Elitus River, something like that. It's something you'll need to figure out yourself. Oh, shoot. Oh, no. You can see the full image of Svavenka. Uh-oh. Pretend like you didn't. I mean, I think it's fine. She's covering herself, right? She's like the sexiest image in this book, I think. I feel like Miriana is also like covering her boobs. But in any case, yeah, you'll want to work out exactly where the real river is. You might want to draw your own map or like make your own map for this region. The book is really unclear about exactly where things kind of start and exactly why things aren't visible from the sky, etc. And whether or not certain rivers are even marked on the map. I just have the River of Va and the related rivers nearby not be marked on modern maps. There's no reason why they need to be, because most people don't, like, this isn't really a populated region, but it's up to you. In any case, so on the way into the city, the book has a listed encounter against some giant whose name I forgot. It was a frost giant and a group of 4 cloud giants. I think that's a little bit weak sauce. This city is supposed to be occupied by a giant army, basically. What I like to do is I have the entire road up to Xin-Shalast be populated by giants, and then I run a reverse chase where the it's not a reverse chase, it's just a chase, but the party's being chased. I let the party get chased into the city if they get spotted along the way. I think that's a fun way to do it. You don't get to do that many chases in this adventure, so it's kind of a fun alternative. Or you can just have there be a few, some bigger encounters. Basically, at this point and anywhere further, anywhere they put giants in 2nd edition, I would replace them with troops of giants if you can, or larger numbers of low-level giants, or giants with low HP, AC, and saves. I think it's a pretty good way of handling it. It should feel like there should be more scale at this point in the adventure. The parties are heroes. They've already slayed plenty of giants at this point. Throwing them a handful of giants is not really enough to feel, I think, super heroic. And it feels oddly empty if there's only like a handful of giants protecting any given place. So that's my suggestion, is to kind of scale things up a little bit here in 2nd edition. It's a little bit less neat. It's probably less likely that you can do it in 1st edition just because of how the math works out, but maybe you can find a way. I haven't really experimented that much with doing like homebrew troops and stuff in 1st edition. I've delved way more into that in 2nd. But yeah, let's see. So yeah, I feel like Karzoug's minions should probably be expecting the party by now. He's seen you at seen the party at the Rune Forge already. He knows they're probably going to come for him. This information should likely have at this point, Karzoug can talk to people in this world. He should probably have filtered some of this information down. His army should know that the party is coming. They should be ready for the party in general. I know he's supposed to have some amount of hubris, but he's not dumb, right? Like, he shouldn't be stupid. All right. If you do run a chase, I think it's fun to have the chase end right as the party is like going into some like abandoned building near the entrance of town, and then that can pretty much go right into the meeting Morgiv inside one of the abandoned buildings. So, lower Xin-Shalast. The lower city is kind of a big just set of events across a huge sprawling map, which you can kind of see here, with just a huge number of various events and encounters that the party can sort of interact with. Basically, none of them are mandatory as written. So what you kind of have to rely on here are a couple of blockers to prevent the party from progressing straight up to the peak. If the party realizes there's still more mountain to go, the Spires are up there at the peak, they're probably going to think that Karzoug's up at the top. Like, why wouldn't he be? It seems like the obvious place to go. So if the party does try to go to the top, they should find out that there's an occluding field there, that they can't get past it. And not only can they not get past it, I like to extend the the death zone a little bit so that it's more of an ordeal to even go up to the top. You can add high winds and things to prevent them from flying super easily up there. I would add more enemies in that region that are like on the ground or in the skies that are looking out for the party, to make it again a bit more treacherous to just kind of try to go straight there. But they do need either Sahedron rings or Sahedron medallions to get through the occlusion field, or anti-greed weapons. And they probably don't have enough anti-greed weapons for the entire party, for one. And two, they probably don't even know how to get through the occlusion field. Or that those things are what you need to get through the occlusion field. Even if you tricked them into wearing Sahedron stuff, they might not all be wearing it at this point. It's a toss-up. But the sort of other kind of secondary blocker that I like to use is explaining that Karzoug knows they're there. He's got troops stationed very heavily in the upper city and along the kind of main route up to the Spires. So if the party tries to go that way, they can see clearly it's going to be a lot of fights. And it would be very exhausting to do. So that should just feel unappealing to the party. Must be rocking sufficient bling to roll up to this club. Exactly, Will. Extend the death zone is a phrase I would like to hear more in everyday life. Become the reality you want to see in the world. I think that's the way that phrase goes. Especially if you need EXP, or if you need time to sort of build in extra levels in your milestones, you should probably try to guide the players to the goal of wanting to weaken Karzoug's forces as like kind of a first task before proceeding up to the peak, in addition to kind of gathering information in the lower city. Depending on how good you are at sort of selling the tension, you might, if you're too good at making things too tense in terms of like the kind of feel of when Karzoug is going to return, this might be a bit of a hard sell for your party. Just be prepared for it. You might need to justify this a bit more than you would anything else in the game. Especially if the party doesn't need many rings or... actually, so as written, I believe you actually do need a ring. I don't think that an anti-greed weapon is sufficient to bypass the occluding field. I forgot about this already. I've cemented it in my mind because I think it makes sense. I made one of the reasons to go to the Rune Forge and get an anti-greed weapon was because I gave them additional anti-occluding field properties. So that kind of backfires a little bit if they can just if the entire party has anti-greed weapons, then in that world they could all just get past it without needing to fight anything in the lower city. In which case maybe you don't give it that property and instead require the rings. It's up to you, or how you've communicated it. You can also kind of frame it as if the party tries to go up to the summit first without dealing with the lower city, then those lower city encounters can kind of, once Karzoug finds out, they'll move up to the Pinnacle and the party will be surrounded. And that could itself be enough incentive to take things out one at a time instead. It really depends on how much you want to extend this book out. When I last ran it, it ended up being the longest part of the adventure, partially because of just the format of how we played it. I think the party ended up doing a lot of... they ended up playing it a little bit wargamey almost. Not really wargamey, but they were doing a lot of battle planning and scouting and stuff, and because we played on kind of relatively short, kind of 2-ish hour sessions each week, they would do a lot of planning one week, forget what they planned, and then replan or change their plans the next week, and not actually get anything done. So it was a lot of planning, a lot of not doing anything. If you're able to kind of keep things moving, then that's not really as much of a problem. You can get through an encounter or two every week or every session, or a couple encounters a session. It's totally doable. It depends on your speed. But I would try to keep things moving. I think that's the danger of this section, is letting things drag on a little bit too much. So yeah, don't be afraid to let players let events just kind of happen to the players. You don't have to run this as a fully open exploration kind of game. I've actually sort of found that fully open exploration is good, but fully open kind of unguided exploration can be very choice paralysis-y in this way. Yeah, you don't need it to be nonlinear. You can just, if the party doesn't have an immediate thing of where they want to go next, just force it on them. You can just have Glorifex show up. You can just have Gamagan attempt to assassinate them. Like, you could just push things forward. That's the main thing in this section, I think. Just try to, this is like my big mistake from last time, I think. I should have just pushed things more and just kind of keep events rolling and rolling and rolling in this section. Another note, hopefully you've tricked your players into wearing Sahedrons at this point. At least one, hopefully, will be wearing one, because Karzoug can now see through their eyes and speak through their voice. Very, very fun when you have it happen the first time. You should wait a little bit so that they use some of their kind of common battle tactics first before they find out, because as soon as they find out, they're going to want to take off all their Sahedron stuff. And then they're going to eventually find out that they need that Sahedron stuff to get into the Pinnacle. So they're going to be forced to put it on eventually later anyway, but it's fun if it's kind of a big reveal at some kind of interesting moment that Karzoug gets to taunt them through the Sahedron items. It's naked crushy time again, yep. I already mentioned, yeah, but consider using troops for a lot of the encounters here. I like to scale up their attacks and damage, but keep their HP and AC unscaled and saves unscaled. And I feel like that works pretty well for like doing relatively quick encounters. Party still feels like they're being heroic, but there's still some danger from getting hit by enemies. The enemies just don't last very long. So, helping the Spared. Morgiv, the kind of spokesperson for the Spared, I think is very cute in like a weird dorky way. I wish he had a full body to look at, but we only have his neck and up, sadly. And I don't think there's art of his species anywhere. There's general art for the skulks, but they're supposed to be kind of variant skulks. Yeah, I don't know. I like the Spared. I think their story is fun. Remember that they don't speak common. I think it's easy to forget that with any NPC that shows up. They probably know some variant of Thessalonian. Make sure that Morgiv, when explaining stuff, explains the story of Mesmina, and he can also talk about some of the Lysala lore, because Mesmina was a cleric of Lysala. You can also use that time to kind of get in some of the, like, Lysala used to be a good god, but then turned evil, and you're also free to do whatever you want with Mesmina. She's mentioned as being the savior of the Spared, but by that point, Lysala should already have been an evil god. So you're kind of free to do whatever you want with that information. Maybe Mesmina had seen the error of her ways. What I did was I like having her maybe being like still believing in the good part of Lysala and not believing that Lysala had turned evil yet. And I think that's kind of a fun angle for her. I also did something else, which I'll mention later, much later. But I think she's an interesting story, especially if you have any religious characters in the party. The idea of this woman like appearing to save these enslaved people right as the end times were happening is pretty cool. It's interesting. It's fun. As far as dealing with the hidden beast goes, once the party deals with the hidden beast and eliminates the weird vampire Decapus thing, The spared can immediately become useful spies, informants, guides throughout the city. They can give the party a rough map. I think it's a good first thing for the party to be doing. So I like to have Morgiv just show up like as soon as the party arrives, push Morgiv onto them and guide them to dealing with the hidden beast. Because also once they've killed the hidden beast, that location just acts as a good lair. And I think Morgiv also brings them a bunch of items afterwards. So it's a good like kind of starting point for like setting up a home base in the city. And the Spared are also very good for stalling for time. They can communicate things like, hey, if you try to go up the main road to Xin-Shalast, I hear there's a bunch of giants and stuff on that road, and they're watching the skies, so it might not be good to approach. But we've heard that there's a secret path that Mizmina took back in the old times to help our people out of the Pinnacle, or help some of our people out of the Pinnacle. Maybe we can find that location for you. And then you can use that to stall for time. So while the Spared are looking for the hidden path, the party can be focused on doing these other things until you're ready, and then the Spared can show up and be like, "Hey, we found the path." Pathfinder. I love his soft, squishy face. Yeah, isn't it so cute? I love his little eyes, his little creepy eyes, and his tiny ears. I don't know, he's supposed to be ugly and creepy, but I find him somewhat adorable. Morgiv, my son, my poor son. On someone less cute, we've got Gukek and his rebellion. So this guy is, again, a stone giant, air quotes. Easy to potentially miss that he is actually a hill giant using illusion magic to pretend to be a stone giant to gain more clout. It's there. It's a funny part of his story. He's mainly here to explain to the party how the Sahedron rings work, basically. He's also a good opportunity for more RP if your party wants to get more involved in the kind of like giant liberation side of things here in Xin-Shalast. He's a good kind of face for all of the giants who are here who don't necessarily want to be doing Karzoug's bidding, who are maybe having second thoughts. It can kind of show that not everybody in Karzoug's army is evil. And that can be pretty fun. His whole secret identity thing it's very silly, it's inconsequential. You could ignore it if you wanted to. I think it's worth keeping because it's just funny. But your players might see it and then hate him for it. I feel like some players see someone being sneaky and are immediately like, they're doing evil. Gukek is kind of doing evil, I guess, in that he wants power for himself, sort of, but like he's not that big of a threat. I play him a little bit more kind of on the level when I run Gukek. It's kind of up to your own personal tastes here. If you want him to be more like scheming and conniving, that's totally a thing you can do. You just kind of have to figure out what does that mean for the rest of the giants. Is there someone else who could kind of step up and help the giants be liberated if you want to go that route? Yeah, it's sort of up to you on how you manage it. One thing I like, at least about how the game played out with third action, is it did a good job of making the giants somewhat human instead of just being big old monsters. Yeah, I try to do that. I mean, I think it's sort of what Gukek is here for. It's also what Kona is there for in Jorgenfist. I think it's important to show that they're not just evil by, like, it's not their entire race is evil. It's that some of the people in charge are evil. They have brought these giants here in hopes of whatever it is they're hoping for, either glory or power or something on riding the coattails of Karzoug to the top. But not every giant needs to believe that. Many of them are probably just here because their whole clan is and they don't have a choice. Or that maybe they're just being duped into this. And in Gukek's case, it's actually, he can also explain some of the aspects of the rune giants and their control mechanisms over the giants at large, because there is some manner of like, they do some degree of mind control, I think, via applying runes to people and turning them into rune slaves. So there's probably some aspect of like, oh, some of the giants aren't haven't been behaving like normally, and they've turned into drones. After they had their induction ceremony at Shalaria, the kind of room giant college at the northern part of Xin-Shalast. There's definitely a lot of cool stuff you can do here. I think it's fun RP moments. I wouldn't skip him, but it might not come up if the party just doesn't go there or doesn't try to interact with them. But he can also just seek the party out as well. I think that's written in the book that he will look for the PCs if he finds out that they're there. But yeah, I think it's interesting. Next up is Gamagen, the Ice Devil Mantis guy, and the Heptaric Locus. This one's just kind of fun. He's just an Ice Devil assassin who he just happens to be here in Xin-Shalast. Karzoug has hired him. I think it's fun if Karzoug has hired him specifically to kill the PCs. He can kind of try to assassinate them around town. If you're using alignment, he's supposed to be, I think, lawful evil, which means he's very kind of contract-oriented. I like to play that as him being kind of an honorable killer in a way. And if the party doesn't ever directly go to him, I think it's reasonable to either have him try to assassinate the players directly or send like Scarlet Walkers after them. Or in my case, I had him like send an invitation to their own doom, which incited the players to go towards him. Otherwise, the players aren't really likely to just go to the Heptaric Locus on their own, unless they find out that Gamagen exists and has a ring and they need more rings. If they've got a big party, they might need lots of rings, and Gamagen's one of the few, so he's got one. Ice on the Fringe is so damn frosty. The people like, damn, that's a cold-ass honky. Those sound like lyrics. But thank you, Will, for the addition. But yeah, this one's an encounter in a Coliseum. It's pretty cool. I just like making Jason read lyrics. Thanks. It's from Thrift Shot? Oh, wait, the song? Okay, I know the song. I just don't know the lyrics, apparently. Yeah, but this is a cool Coliseum encounter. You don't get to do one of those very often, and they're fun to do. Feel free to turn the arena into more of like a kind of fun gladiatorial thing with hazards, and you can also add additional enemies if you want. You can make it a whole spectacle. I kind of like to have Gamagen be invisible and like wait for some rounds of combat to happen first and then appear. But it's up to you how you want to run him. Again, he's not very consequential. It's just a fun encounter to have. Then we get to the Bank of Glorifex. So Glorifex is this giant blue dragon, lightning and illusion, basically, are his things. He should basically be a constant threat throughout all of Xin-Shalast. He should, if the party is doing a lot of flying around, he should definitely be a threat. Potentially take them out while they're in the skies. He is a limiting factor on what the party can kind of just freely do on the surface. If they're having a lot of street encounters, you can have him just interrupt those battles on the street. But regardless of how often or when you have them encounter him, I think it's important to have the party eventually follow him back to his lair. So he should not really try to fight to the death in any given outside of his lair encounter. The party should follow him to his lair, that way they can get all his loot at the end. And his lair is inside a big ass bank, which is like totally appropriate for a big fight against something greedy, right? It's a cool encounter. I modified how the bank looks itself. I forgot to mention also I included all of my chapter or book 6 maps in the link in the description, so you should be able to, if you want to steal any of my maps, go for it, or feel free to use them as inspiration or modify them or whatever. I don't think they're the best, but they're good enough. But yeah, fighting a bank is really cool. I put his loot inside a vault and had it be like meticulously organized and like categorized and come with item descriptions already laid out, so the party doesn't have to do any kind of identification or anything, because I think it's fun to have a dragon that's relentlessly anal. I think after I did that, the treasure vault came out and has a dragon who basically does exactly that. But why can't Glorifex do it too? I also run Glorifex as basically just a bit of a fanboy. He's done a lot of research on Karzoug. He knows about Karzoug. He's really excited about Karzoug's ideals, and he knows that Karzoug typically rides a blue dragon, or like keeps a blue dragon at his side. And Glorifex wants to be that blue dragon at his side. He wants so desperately for Karzoug to love him. And he's so excited for Karzoug to get back. So he's really, really pumped up for this return. That's kind of my angle for him. I love Glorifex. I think he's really annoying, or can be really annoying to the party. In his horde, just go all out. Fill it with whatever items you think would be useful to the party as well. Middle point here. I should have rearranged these points a little bit. But middle point, if you really want to make your players mad, if he's been annoying the party a lot, and the party does eventually kill him, feel free to revive him. If the party doesn't eliminate his body, I think this is a good point where, like, the party probably has access to resurrection magic. They might have revived somebody already by now. It should be clear that the enemies could do that too. And I think Glorifex is a good choice for somebody that's like, I think he's worth resurrecting potentially. And he seems like he'd be pretty pissed if he were to die for any reason, and would definitely want a good second chance. So if there's anyone to resurrect on the enemy side, I think it's Glorifex. I think he's just fun that way. I did it last time. It was annoying. I think my players hated it. I loved it. Double thumbs up from me. Frankly, one of the most hilarious turns of the AP. It's really good. I think it's fun. You don't want to reuse it too many times, but I think it's a fun thing to pull out once an adventure. You don't want to get in the habit of bringing all of your villains back, but I think he's fun. Okay, and then we have the Tangle, which is up in the top northeast corner of the. I guess my camera's. Oh, I'm mirrored because that's how mirrors work, or cameras work. Kind of flip. Okay, in the northeast of Xin-Shalast is a zone called the Tangle. It has been overrun. Basically, the source was like the old baths. I think there was some kind of mold that grew there and expanded into a giant fucking tangle of eldritch horror that is slowly encroaching on the city. It has this goal of one day enveloping all of Galarian, but in 10,000 years has only grown to be like a few blocks of this city. And it's very funny from like a a lore perspective that the players are just never gonna learn. Sometimes players are tempted to go in there. The book makes it sound like it's going to be this whole big ordeal, like it's outside of the scope of the adventure. In reality, I think you can turn it into like a couple of encounters and deal with it. They do mention that the core, the root of the Tangle is just a massive yellow musk creeper. I think that'd be easy enough to stat out. It could be pretty dangerous. It could be pretty scary. It could be pretty fun. It's up to you how you want to run it. I think it's pretty silly, though. There's plenty of stuff going on in this book. You don't need to do it. But if your party does do it, then I would add some rewards here. Primal magic-related things could be good, given that it's this big primal mass of horribleness. If you've got a crafter in your party, then maybe special materials could be gotten from this. I think as written, there's just nothing to gain here, so there's no reason to go. But if you want the party to deal with it, it's there. You can deal with it. It's kind of worded vaguely, like it might be important in some other future adventure, but as far as I could find, I don't think this comes up ever again. So really, do whatever you want with it. It's just kind of a fun silliness. You're welcome, Will. I had some ideas for if you had gone there. There would be some primal shit that you could have gotten, Mr. Druid. But you didn't go there. You thought about it, but you chose not to, so you didn't get it. I mean, it's more of just a bonus. Like, again, it's not really required to do. There's no real point. If you wanted to make it more of a point, you could say that you could have the spared be a little bit more like, oh no, it's so scary, it's been growing every year kind of thing. And that might incentivize the party to go take a more serious look at it. No, I'm like, that seems tangential and we have the world to save. Yes, exactly. It is very tangential and you do have a world to save. It's ultimately not important. But yeah, if the spared, okay, yeah, you said, yeah, that probably would have done it. If the spared were actually like, had mentioned that they were more afraid of it, then it can be more of a draw to deal with. I think I've done it both ways, and it's fine either way. It's really about like how many encounters do you want to have, how much time do you want to spend in Xin-Shalast. If your party's having fun and is really enjoying the kind of role-playing angles and you've got some druids or primal casters in your party, I think it's a good add. If you're trying to kind of wrap things up because you are getting really close to the end, then you might just want to skip it. But I would try to keep it to no more than like 1 or 2 sessions in the Tangle, because really it's not important. Okay, this one is the Museum of Greed. This is not something that's in the AP, but this is something that I thought was pretty cool, and I think my players liked it enough when we ran it that I would actually encourage everybody to kind of do this. Basically, this is an additional building that I added to Xin-Shalast, that I actually set the hidden path that the party is supposed to find via the spared. I made the hidden path be accessible only through the museum. So this is a little bit of like an exit through the gift shop thing, but if the party goes to the museum, then they have a chance to learn a lot more about Karzoug, about Xin-Shalast, about basically about any lore they might have missed. There's a bunch of lore on Karzoug himself that, unless the party ever goes and like specifically reads up on him specifically, then they might have missed. And it also would have happened a long time ago, like back when they were in Jorgenfist, which is 2 books ago. This is really a chance they're about to go to the final like dungeon. This is a great chance to give them a chance to kind of lore dump and learn as much as they can about the Runelord. So what I do, I basically just add a bunch of exhibits with some like little placards. A bunch of the stuff here is stolen or like missing by this point, but they can at least see some like little dioramas of things, interesting information about Karzoug, what his sort of general vibe was, his backstory. I also like to add information about his tactics here, stuff that you're planning on in your head. Some of his like signature spells you can sort of mention here, something like his weaponry. It's worth mentioning the Alara High and the Alara Quinn, basically the 7 polearms of the sinful rule that each of the Runelords wield. Karzoug has his burning glaive, so you can give information about his burning glaive here and what capabilities it has. You can also mention the Alara High, which Karzoug's Alara High is Chelin, which has been currently given to Viorian Takanti. And that has its own cool powers, like when it cuts people, it turns them to crystals. That's cool stuff that you can mention here so the party knows about it before they see it. It's much cooler when they like see the sword and already know what it does, rather than get hit by the sword once, or maybe never. They might not ever get hit by the sword, and then they'll never know what it does, and that sucks. So I like giving them this information a little bit up front. It also helps prepared casters. If you've got prepared casters in your party, gives them a little bit more ideas of like what kind of spells they should prep. Going into the final battles, it can give your players ideas on sort of how to roleplay and interact with Karzoug once they get up to him. Yeah, I think it's just a lot of fun. I also set aside a separate kind of library room where I put the Paizo Golem, just because I think he's a fun little guy. He's just a little guy. And he can help identify extra items or fill in some lore gaps. There's information about Earthfall that the party, if the players don't already know about Earthfall and how it works or haven't looked it up yet, then the Paizo Golem can kind of explain some of that to them. He's a good mouthpiece for the party if you need it. Was the Paizo Golem made by Xander Ghoul? No, that's the Quill. Yeah. That's what you said. Okay. Jason, what did the Paizo Golem do with the Anathema archive? I have to know. I think he just took it back to... I forget. Does he work for the... I think I made him work for the... what's it called? The Akashic Record. Yes, thank you. Got it just beforehand. Yeah, I think he just returned our party gave the Paizo Golem the Anathema archive because it was an evil artifact. And the Paizo Golem was like, sure, I'll take it. And he's like, he collects lore. He trades lore. Or it trades lore, rather. I don't think it has a gender. And yeah, I think the Paizo Golem just took the Anathema archive and went and put it in the Akashic Record somewhere. I like to think of the Akashic Record as a weird, like, semi-real place. I think it's got a plane at least in the old planar setup. I don't know if... Actually, I forgot to look if Rage of Elements changed how the Akashic Record is laid out. I love using the Akashic Record as a general lore bit, even if I don't know anything about it, really. Greshy's owed some payback for that lore. I think you guys got information from it, didn't you? I think he traded you some info, or is... I don't remember. I have to go back and check. Well, if you ever go find the Paizo Golem again, you can find out. Maybe he'll give you some extra info. Oh yeah, you could try to go talk to him to see if he knows anything about where Phelan is. Okay, so let's see. Give me my dog. Where is he? Who knows? Where could he be? Spoilers for third action, but the dog is missing. He may have walked into a what was it? The purple color of prismatic wall. Oh, prismatic sphere? I think I did prismatic sphere, and got locked in some random dimension, and who knows where he is. Okay. Scaling Mhar Massif. Let's go. Oops. Alright, yeah. Alright, so make sure that, again, make sure you have your elevations figured out. There's a lot of reference to elevations, but not a clear, they never, like, spell out exactly what all the elevations are on, like, a map or anything. I drew it out on my own map. I, like, blew up the regional map. Yeah, this regional map here. I think I've showed you guys already. I'll hide Svavenka's boobs. Oh no, Svavenka, get out of there. So this map here of the Xin-Shalast environs, I made like a blown up version of that, and you can kind of see the spires are listed there. I made a modified version of this and kind of did dotted outlines of where I think rough elevation zones are, just so that I know exactly where the death zone begins for the party and like what different heights are at as far as like flying and stuff goes. It's maybe a bit more detailed than anyone else really cares about, but I like to have it just in case the party is trying to fly somewhere. I need to have excuses ready for why the party can't just fly everywhere. Maybe that's just me. If you want to let your party fly up to the top, I guess go ahead. But in any case, Yeah, adjust the things as needed for your convenience. It doesn't really matter exactly where the lines are. You could have the death zone extend all the way down into Lower Xin-Shalast if you wanted, I suppose, but that'd be really weird for all the inhabitants. Generally assume like extreme cold. I forget what the equivalent is in first edition, but it should be very, very cold up there. I start the death zone about halfway between the lower city and the summit, so that the suffocation kind of mini game has some presence, and the party can't just like ignore it, or at least not without having some kind of method to get to bypass it. If the party is determined not to use rings, I think air bubble can kind of work with repeated castings in first edition. Because I believe it has a minute per per either character level or spell level. I think it's a minute per character level. So at close to like 18th level or 17th level, it's got 17 minutes. You might be able to get most of the way up the mountain on just a cast of air bubble for one person. In second edition, though, it's limited to 1 minute, so you might need to find some kind of let your party kind of creative solution, some kind of way to get air bubble to work for multiple party members. Oh, actually, this is a funny thing that occurred in my last game. The party failed to identify, they critically failed, I think, in identification of the Sahedron rings. And thus, I think for basically most of the rest of the game, thought that the Sahedron rings only gave the same effect as the Sahedron medallions. But in fact, the Sahedron rings also grant air bubble for free, like a permanent air bubble effect. So that was kind of funny. So my group actually didn't know that they could use the rings to avoid the suffocation, and thus had to work out some weird invention thing of like basically making an air rebreather to work their way up the mountain. But those things can happen. It's funny. Don't fight your party too much on that one, or on like trying to like find sneaky ways around it. You don't really want them to like actually suffocate on the way up. But it's fun if like maybe one person has to try to hold their breath all the way up, or it varies, but that's not really the goal. The goal isn't to kill them by using the mountain. The goal is to have them try to overcome this challenge in some way, and let them be creative. Let them, if they want to use like a higher level spell slot to cast air bubble, sure, I don't see why not. It's fine. I love burning high level spell slots off of party members. That's pretty cool. TBH. And yeah, they should probably also know about the death zone before getting there. I suppose if they kill Morgiv, Savanka, and Gukak, or like they never meet them or something, then they probably won't know, and then they'll just start suffocating and be like, why am I dying? Which it can be funny in its own right, but they should probably meet someone who will probably tell them about it before they go up there. I mean, I guess it's really their own fault if they don't, so whatever. I guess you don't really have to go out of your way on that one. Oh god, where is all the air gone? Yeah, basically. Making the climb itself, there's like almost no detail on exactly how that should be run. It's up to you how you want to do it. My most recent attempt, I came up with the idea of Ms. Mina using some kind of secret tunnel to like get the spared out of the Pinnacle region and into the lower city. So I let the party use the secret tunnel for most of the route, with a couple of spots where they had to like go out of the tunnel onto like a cliff face and get into the next part of the tunnel. I think that's a pretty fun approach to it that kind of explains why the party needs to use this tunnel and not just take the above ground route. Seemed to work for that group. The time I ran it prior to that, I think the party made a bunch of what's the ethereal horse called? Phantom Steed. They did a Phantom Steeds for the whole party, and then I think I just had them hold their breath, I believe. And so they did like a kind of a race to the summit, where they were like rolling checks to see if they could stay conscious while riding as fast as they could, after having already kind of cleared out the region. That's an approach you can take. It doesn't really matter what you do, as long as you kind of find a way that works and makes sense for your group. I like to also add a few environmental encounters along the way, because it's fun to have them. You don't get to have them very often. Skyrim Steed, Phantom Steed up the summit equals Skyrim speedrun strats. Yes, vertical Phantom Steeds, just jittering along along mountainsides. I like to add some environmental encounters. Huge chasm, sheer cliff that they gotta climb, a big ass avalanche, a ledge that collapses out from under them, and basically in at least second edition, high winds are your friend. They are the excuse that stops everybody from flying. Because I think the moment anybody sees that they need to do an acrobatics check to try to fly somewhere, they probably give up after a little bit. So yeah, just it's high up in the sky, or it's like super high elevations in the middle of the mountains. There's no reason why there can't be really strong winds all the time. There's just really strong winds. Make the party fight for it. Especially if the party's got some characters that have like really good investments in athletics or climbing or specific like niche things like that. This is sort of your last time to let those characters shine or like do interesting things. So with those powers, so I think it's a good chance to use it. Like rangers specifically have a lot of cool stuff that they can use here. I think it's just worth having. Okay, and then at some point along the journey, the party is supposed to meet some invaders from Leng. These are some Leng spiders. They're very oddly friendly. They have their little slings of like little stones that they're supposed to attack with potentially, but I don't see why the party should ever fight these guys. They should be, I think they should be a little bit dismissive. Like, the book writes them as being incredibly arrogant and dismissive of the party. I like them to be, like, excessively polite, because I think that's funnier. It's very bizarre to see these strange spider-like creatures who are, like, incredibly kind, or who seem incredibly kind on the face of things. They're basically just here to tell the players about the Leng device, because there's no other way they're going to find out about it, really. It was a secret project that Karzoug was working on. None of his minions really know any of the details about it. So the Leng spiders are here to tell the party about the Leng device and make sure that they destroy it. As written in the book, they also don't really know exactly what's going on with the Leng device. But I feel like it's totally safe to just have them kind of explain what's going on with the Leng device. I don't see why they can't know more details than they are, than like the bare minimum. It's not like the party's going to have any other way to find out, right? So basically, you want the party. What I would do is I would explain that there are denizens of Leng that are working with Karzoug. They're from the Dreamlands. They're doing some kind of weird magic. They helped him learn his methods of time and space distortion, and they are helping power this device in some way, or control this device. The device itself has the ability to siphon energy off of, when Karzoug returns, they're siphoning some of the excess energy to power a big time portal out of Riddleport. That's the cipher gate for the big army to come through, and that's bad. So it will also trigger if the party returns without Karzoug. So no matter what, they've got to destroy this thing unless they want to deal with a big-ass army in Riddleport. The book also is a little bit unclear on exactly where the time gate ends up. It makes it sound like the army is going to end up in Xin-Shalast somehow. I don't understand how that works. Again, it's kind of loose. That's my reading, is that they would go through the portal in Riddleport and would just appear in Riddleport. Like just outside in like baby boats or something. I don't know. Don't need to think about it too much. It shouldn't actually happen, but you probably need some reasoning there. And yeah, the key is that the party needs to destroy it before finding Karzoug. This is entirely to get the party to basically full clear the Pinnacle of Avarice before going into the Eye of Avarice. So yeah, these guys don't really need to fight the party. They just give the information and then go off on their merry way. That's how I like to run them. If you want to encounter them, sure. I don't think they're that interesting of a fight. Okay, dealing with the actual denizens of Ling as like kind of a plot device. Again, yeah, it's mostly just a reason to full clear the Pinnacle. They have this whole side scheme going on, as mentioned in the book, that is only revealed if it happens, like if it successfully happens. For people who don't know, the idea is that they're actually planning to backstab Karzoug, and what they're really using the excess energy for is they plan to there's an outer god named Mhar who is trapped inside Mhar Massif, the mountain, and once Karzoug returns, they're going to channel that energy into the mountain to set the outer god free, and Mhar is going to destroy all of Galarian. So the actual thing that's going to happen if the party returns, or if Karzoug returns without the Ling device being destroyed or powered off, is that they're going to let an outer god out, basically. That's really fucked up and complicated. I don't know many GMs who would want to deal with that outcome. It's certainly interesting. There's a whole section in the book that's dedicated to like what happens if the party lets this happen. I like the idea of the party teaming up with Karzoug, which is one of the presented options. Where like you need somebody who's powerful enough to help stop them, and it happens to be Karzoug. I guess you'll have to work together. Like that's kind of funny, but. It's such an out of left field thing that I don't think it's really worth doing. If your group's into it, sure. It's a lot of extra homebrew. I guess you'd be doing a lot of level 20 play at that point, or level 18, 19 play if you were playing first edition. You could extend the game that way, but I don't know if you really want to extend this game. It's like probably 3 to 5 years of playtime at this point. Who is trying to extend Rise of the Runelords further is my question. So it's very funny. I would just skip it or ignore it. You get the threat of the army is already a threat enough, and kind of keeps things focused on Karzoug and his army rather than dealing with extra outer god shenanigans. But it's possible. If you want to do it, do it. But otherwise, I think it's fun to foreshadow all these connections to the Dreamlands. Of the stuff that's been mentioned, basically anything you see in the book that speaks Aklo is something that could have come from the Dreamlands. So there's the weird connection with the River of that why it's a phantom river. Well, it's kind of partially in the Dreamlands, and that the entire city is actually kind of partially in the Dreamlands. There's the Windwalkers themselves, which are mentioned as speaking Aklo and coming from a dream world. The Scarlet Walkers, the Hidden Beast himself, there's the big mountain roper at the end of, or at the start of the secret tunnel path. The Lang spiders, all of those things are Lang creatures, or creatures from the dream realms, nightmare realms. Savvy PCs might pick up on this. Recall knowledge checks throughout this book can kind of pick up on some of this information and sort of put some connections together. And it's just kind of it's sort of the sideline narrative that's running through this plot here. Okay. And then the Spires themselves. They're largely unoccupied. Some of them are supposed to be kind of lightly occupied, but I wouldn't fill any of them, really. There's some like small bits of lore available. The lore that's there isn't like super interesting, and most of it isn't stuff that the party can learn just by exploring them. It's stuff that they'd have to read in a book, I guess, or you'd have to insert more lore. The book also just doesn't really detail these locations very much, so if you're doing battle maps, you have to make your own battle maps and stuff. But I would largely keep these buildings as being simple ruins or fairly empty buildings that have basically not been occupied since Earthfall happened. I think it's the safest, or it's like the easiest way to deal with these buildings. If you wanted, you could move some of the lower Xin-Shalast encounters up here to upper Xin-Shalast in the Spires, but it's not really necessary. They're kind of just filler here. It feels a little bit like they wanted to put some stuff here in the book, but realized they didn't have enough space for it. So I think it's fine to just kind of leave them empty. You don't need to fill it out any further. Again, you've got plenty of encounters to deal with. It's not necessary. And yeah, I would also make sure that the occluding field only really affects, like the core occluding field that actually blocks teleportation and stuff, should only really affect the Pinnacle proper. It'd be a little bit strange for it to affect the entire summit, I think. I don't actually know what the book says, but I think that's the easier way to handle it. And yeah, if they want to explore any of the buildings, I would just go really simple, say like, you spend an hour searching the building and you find this, this, and this. They mentioned there being like some wraiths and ghosts and things in like the prisons, but who cares? It's not interesting. Those encounters are not relevant. All right, finally, the Pinnacle. This is my map of the Pinnacle that I built. I adjusted it pretty heavily from... not that heavily. I rearranged things, like the entire eastern side I made more straight, like vertical, rather than being at weird angles and curves. Paizo loves their really strongly curved maps, and I hate running those in VTTs, so I kind of simplify it. And it's totally fine. I think I might have added more rooms to it as well. I made the vault a little bit more interesting, but otherwise I kept everything kind of the same locations here. Again, that map should also be in the description. But, alright, so the party finally reaches the Pinnacle. What's going on here? So, again, this was formerly Karzoug's seat of power. It's where his throne room was. Right before Earthfall, they were enacting this plan to escape the calamity that was coming, and they kind of turned it into a bunch of stasis chambers to, for Karzoug's minions to stay in while he fucked off and went and hid in a kind of pocket dimension in the Eye of Avarice. This was supposed to last for 100 years. It failed for some reason. Presumably due to the Earthfall, and it wasn't until Mhar disintegrated his way in through... I wrote X10. X10 is the location on the map. I think it's this little spot down here in the southwest corner. Like very, very south corner here. There's like a hole in the wall that Mhar disintegrated his way through 10,000 years later, and finally woke everybody up, kind of by mistake. He was following up on some leads that he found at Jorgenfist, and then the entire events of the adventure path started to kick off. The remaining inhabitants here are basically Karzoug's last line of defense and his kind of mission coordinators. You've got Khalib, his apprentice, who is basically just setting up protections against the party members. You've got Most High Seoptra, who is basically just coordinating all the Lamias in their attempts to like ritually murder people for the big revival. You've got the denizens of Ling, who are prepping the Ling device and its for its activation to bring Karzoug back. And then you've got Viorian, who's just kind of big chillin', hanging out on the throne, not doing much, waiting for Karzoug to return, and otherwise being a menace to any party members that might happen to show up. And everyone's basically just waiting very tensely for Karzoug's return. So that's kind of the vibe here, is that everyone's just kind of, they're so close, they can almost taste it. They can feel his power coming back. And they're all eager to please him as much as possible, so that when he comes back, he gives them a huge bonus. So climbing the stairs, from the outside, you can see this like big ass spiral staircase. It's kind of glossed over in the book, but I think it's really funny to make the party go up 17 flights of stairs. When I say funny, I mean it's epic. but I actually make the entire, I think it's 17 flights of stairs, but I like to make the entire set of floors. That way they have to like walk through each one in a virtual tabletop. It's funnier that way. I also put little trivial encounters on the way up. I did like one of each giant type, basically, just to have the party kind of do something sort of interesting. It gives the party a chance to kind of flex with some of their new stuff. I think I leveled them up to 19 right before arriving, so this was a chance to just kind of show off some of their level 19 powers, have fun, and it's just like an appetizer to the main event. And if you put some enemies here in the kind of stairwell, I think it adds to the feeling that Karzoug is waiting for them and is like, he's got some troops here ready for them, and isn't just like caught off guard by them appearing here. The next big mechanic that's going on here is that Karzoug has these images that if you kill them are supposed to depower him in some way. In first edition, I think it was negative levels. In second edition, I just run it the same way. I also do it as negative levels. Basically like kind of a custom frightened condition is what I do in Foundry, where I just change the type of the penalty to be an untyped penalty, and apply one of these for every destroyed image. And then I recover one destroyed image, or every day that passes afterwards, I recover one of these. And so, yeah, I basically build him as like a level 27 or maybe 26-ish character, and for a level 20 party in second edition, and just have the images remove a level of power basically for each image destroyed. There are, by default, there's only 6 images. I find that really bizarre given all of the 7 theming and the 7 sins and whatnot. I just added one more image because why not? He's supposed to be the 7th question mark? I guess, but I don't think that really works, does it? I mean, it sort of works. The party mentioned it, that like, there's probably supposed to be 7. And I'm like, yeah, I think it makes sense that there's a 7th one. I think I might have added it in reaction to the party thinking that, but it's also possible that I pre-planned the 7th one. I don't 100% remember, because there's some fixed locations in the book where they're supposed to be. I guess I kept them mostly where they were. I think I just added one image to the entryway to the Pinnacle or to the Eye of Avarice, because it feels like there should be one there, just because, like, I mean, wouldn't he be defending his own? I mean, I guess he doesn't get to choose where the points of power are, but I thought it was kind of interesting if he happens to be the kind of final boss before the final boss, right? Because you're almost certainly going to fight Khalid before that. So yeah, I don't know. I think adding one more makes sense. I would add it in this like little throne room here near the end, basically the zone right in front of the eye. I think that's a good spot to put it. But if you don't want to, you don't have to. It doesn't really matter. If the party doesn't understand what's going on here, make sure to include notes from Khalib that can explain it. Allow the party to make knowledge checks to kind of try to understand what's going on with these images and what's happening. They can only be harmed by somebody with a greed weapon. So it's required, and basically if a greed weapon hits one, it's destroyed. And even if the image has disappeared, they can still attack the spot where it was. So it's kind of like a little mini game. So once they find out that they can do this, then they're supposed to sort of go hunting for them. And I think it's a fun thing to do. I also try to make sure one is locked away. So one is supposed to be in the vault by default. I don't think the book puts any items in the vault. So I put items in the vault. I put an image in the vault, and I make sure the vault is locked. So the party has to do something to bypass the lock. And I make it like the top tier lock, which is like a perfect lock or whatever. And if you want, I also add more traps. You can add a couple more traps into the dungeon as well, just generally, especially if you've got some people who are good with traps or who want to deal with traps more. It makes more sense for Karzoug to have some magical traps around, in addition to all the kind of creatures that are hiding here. But it's up to you what you want to do. I say that a lot, but it really is. Really, GMs, just change the adventure if you want to change it. It's fine. As far as spells that he's going to prepare, since the party is very, very likely, and probably you should probably highly encourage the party to do at least one rest before they go for the final encounter in the Eye. Because it's going to happen, feel free to just burn Karzoug's spells. You might want to save a couple of his highest level spells if you're worried that they're going to try to push forward anyway. But for the most part, you can kind of just have him go Nova, shoot disintegrates out like mad, and expect that he'll be able to get all his spells back before the actual final fight. I'll get to some of this in the Karzoug tactics later, but try to prepare primarily transmutation spells because he's a transmuter. There are some spells that used to be transmutation, like Disintegrate, that got changed away from transmutation in 2nd edition. I think I mentioned this before in a prior video, but he's going to need some kind of attacking options, and in 2nd edition, he doesn't have any. And now that the remaster is happening, there's not going to be transmutation spells at all, so it's sort of up to you. Focus on spells that change the form of things. And specifically for him, he's got this whole kind of story about the denizens of Lang teaching him how to shape time and space, and that's how he created the pocket dimension. So I gave him a lot of spells that involve space-time and gravity, because I think those are kind of on theme for him. And I just make all of the spells he casts effectively be transmutation spells, save for a couple that are like obviously not, like Wall of Force or what have you. But yeah, that's kind of the gist of it. He's probably only get 1 or 2 spells off per image. I can't remember what the actual roll is. I think it's supposed to be a 20% check. I think I made it like a DC 11 flat check in 2nd edition. But he probably shouldn't get many castings out per appearance. He's mostly just supposed to be kind of like a surprise threat, scare the party, hit 1 or 2 people with a dangerous spell to kind of rough them up a bit and get them spooked. But you're not trying to have like full-on encounters in the whole or with Karzoug involved. You need to save a little bit of them for the end. And yeah, primarily stick to just damaging spells or like hard effects. Don't have him break out Time Stop yet. That's for the end. Oh, excuse me. Oh, a sip of water. So Viorian, we'll just run through, I think, the remaining sort of villains here that are at the Pinnacle. Viorian is she's going to be his kind of champion. She's wielding the sword of Chelin, one of the Alara High, the Sword of Greed. If you have time, if you've gotten to this point, you've still got plenty of time in your campaign, or maybe you haven't started the campaign yet, consider working Viorian into some character's backstory. She's kind of interesting, but she's also just sort of here. So if you've got some way to tie her into, it's kind of interesting that somebody has like disappeared from like Riddleport or wherever they're supposed to be, and just is here for some reason and is kind of under mind control. So if a party member happened to know her in the past, it's kind of cool. So that's just kind of a character background idea. Like she could be somebody's sister or former lover or a friend or a boss or anything like that. And I think that would make her suddenly a lot more interesting that she's even here. Because otherwise she's just a random lady. She's possessed by a cool sword, whatever. She has some very specific rules, I think, around breaking her connection to Chelin. I think they involve like using Dispel Magic or whatever to break the charm. If the party is able to pull the sword away from her or do sufficient diplomacy, like high-level diplomacy checks or what have you, if they like notice that she's controlled and like take active steps to try and break it and roll really well, just let them do it. It's not specifically important that she needs to that you need like the one specific way to break through it. I would allow it on most things. We had a redeemer in our group who really wanted to save her and used up turns doing diplomacy and trying to disarm her. So when he rolled well and succeeded at that, I just let it happen for the most part. Also, if you don't try to signal any way that she's either connected to the party or that she's in some kind of altered mental state, the party's probably just going to kill her. So that's fine. It doesn't really matter whether or not they do. I think it's more interesting if you try to communicate that a little bit, but it doesn't really matter. And then I think it's just kind of interesting. And then she has some giants with her normally. I swap those out for greed spawn because the party has fought so many giants at this point. I don't think they ever get to fight greed spawn specifically, so I just use some upscaled greed spawn instead. I think they fit a little bit better as like kind of humanoid minions to hang out with her. Next up, the Most High Sioptra. She doesn't really have anything going on here. Her story is really that she's the boss of Zanisha and Lucretia. There's like, she doesn't have any active schemes going on at this point in the game. You could try to make her a little bit more involved, I suppose, in the story, but she just doesn't have a lot to do, I guess. You can use her to kind of solidify the connections between the Lamia and Karzoug if your party just hasn't picked that up yet. They probably should have by now. I'm really curious if anybody has gotten to this point and they didn't know that, but she can kind of outright say it during combat. I don't think she has any additional Lamia like helpers with her normally, but I would give her some. She's got plenty of space in her little rooms nearby, so I don't see why you can't just give her more Lamia. Low-level Lamia, totally fine. It just helps her be a little bit more interesting. She's probably... Her and Khalib both can effectively talk to Karzoug at this point, so she should probably be pretty responsive and reactive to what the party's doing in the dungeon. If the party is, like, camping or turtling or doing any kind of weird strategies, she can just kind of go after them and surprise them. And that can be fun and interesting. Especially if the party's wearing Sahedrons, they should just basically know where the party is at any given point. She also has a lot of notes. She's got a big desk of stuff. And you also have Lucretia and Zanisha's rooms here, so you can fill in a lot of lore if the party missed any of that. And oh yeah, and she has a little a little jail section that's mentioned as like, oh, if any party or if like any characters got captured, they could be held here. I guess they'd have to be given Sahedron rings, which would be kind of weird, but that's probably not likely to have happened. Since it's probably not likely to have happened, I would just turn those into like mini vaults. That makes it make way more sense that there's a summoned guard there. Like, I think Khalib put a demon or something there to guard that room. I don't know why you would do that if there was no creatures being held there, but whatever. I feel like Sioptra seemed like she was going to be really cool and just ended up being a speed bump for third action. Yeah, her encounter, I think both, I think I made her like slightly under level for that encounter. Both she and, yes, Will says both she and Khalid fell down very quickly. Grisha was sleeping on Tempest Surge. Yeah, I think I made a mistake in I was worried that they were going to crunch the party if they were too high level at that point. So I might have made them... I think the party was level 19 by then. I might have made them level 18 because I had intended them to like fight with other creatures. And I think they just ended up being a little bit too weak that way. They each possibly could have been level 20 themselves to be more kind of like full encounters. But also, I mean, the first time I ran this, I did the entire Pinnacle of Avarice in one night, including the final fight with Karzoug. So it's like not like I want Sioptra or Khalib to take up too much time. They really are just speed bumps on the way to the final boss. Narratively, they're not that interesting. They didn't have... Did that group run with chess timers? No, we just ran a really long game. I think we started at like 10 a.m. and ran till like midnight or after midnight on like a Saturday. But yeah, I don't know if there's really... I'm sure other GMs can probably like find good ways to make Sioptra and Khalib more integral or more interesting in the story. They didn't seem quite worth it to me to like go really hard on and like make a big part of the game and like make them really crazy hard bosses or anything. But if you want them to be more challenging, I think you totally can. The Denizens and the Ling device. Another set of encounters here that I think can be fairly trivial if you want it to be. The first time I ran this, I just put on Don't Stop Me Now and let the party like crush them really, really fast. I didn't even bother like scaling them up at all. Party just wrecks them and that's it. If you want, you can... last time I ran it, I added a higher level Denizen with a bit more spells and confusion and stuff to just kind of spice things up. And then when the party kills enough of the denizens, or if they start fucking with the machine, like start destroying it, then a thing from beyond time appears and is supposed to kind of attack the party a bit out of the portal. And honestly, it's written to be like a Hound of Tyndalos specifically. I don't see why it has to be that. It's like has barely any description at all. The picture is just one little tentacle. I should have included the picture here, actually. I forgot. But it's just kind of a tentacle shooting out of a portal. It doesn't really matter what stat block you use. Just grab something with tentacles. It could be a kraken. It could be, I don't know. There's plenty of weird aberrant creatures. As long as it is interesting, it does damage, sure. If you're short on time, like if you're trying to run this all in one night, then you can basically end this counter whenever you want. You can get sucked back into the portal early if you so choose. It's largely just a flavor encounter, but I mean, it's an encounter, so if you're trying to make it a challenge, it can stick around and fight to the death. That's totally reasonable. And I think last of the... I forgot Eruzi, actually. The angel who is here. Has been summoned to guard one of the doors. If you've got a cleric or champion in your party, change Eruzi's allegiance to just be whatever that champion or cleric's god is. And that's kind of already an interesting encounter by itself. The party will probably help set it free in some way. I mean, just defeating it sets it free, so... there's probably... They might try other things. If they've got anti-conjuration weapons, they might use that, or might try banishment, something similar to not have to do a full fight. And then you can have... Eruzi is supposed to be able to come back shortly. I just have him come back the next day and assist the party in the final battle. He can be like a nice heal bot if you're worried about the party maybe having not enough damage, or sorry, not enough healing resources. Both he and Viorian can help the party in the final encounter. Neither one is should be particularly like good, mainly because, I mean, it's the party's show. They should be the ones getting the final blows. But Eruzi should probably stick to just being support magic, and Viorian, if she assists, is not going to be able to use Chelon, because Chelon will just control her. So she's probably going to use some subpar weapon and thus be less effective. Also, I ran Viorian kind of as a swashbuckler, I think. Is that what I did? Maybe I ran her as I ran her maybe between a fighter and a swashbuckler. Oh, right, because I gave her like duelist stances and stuff. I didn't get to use any of it, but it's an idea if you want to. Okay, sorry. Asides. Khalib! It's Khalib! He's here, I guess. I don't... he's kind of like a mini Karzoug. He's supposed to be transmutation expert. He has surprisingly few transmutation spells on his list by default. He has quite a lot of summoning spells. I would just swap out all the summoning for more transmutation if you can. If you make him a little bit stronger, then he makes a good kind of preview of the sort of mechanics that Karzoug might be up to. He should not be nearly as strong as Karzoug, and he should not have all of the exact same spells that Karzoug would have. But he might have a couple of spells that are relevant, right? So, like, Disintegrate is a reasonable one to give him, and it's something I gave, like, all of the Transmutation casters by the end. I wrote it so that he was actually the one sort of responsible for fucking up the 10,000 year sleep schedule, or he thinks that he did in his notes. I thought that was amusing. I think it's amusing to write notes from his perspective, because he is, like, he's got eyes on stealing Karzoug's throne at some point, but he's also really terrified of Karzoug and is really worried about, like, what Karzoug thinks of him. And he's just kind of a fun, weird character. I love writing in universe handouts as well. Yes, I agree. I think Khalib in particular was fun to write for. Weird random note: did you know that he was originally supposed to be a cloud giant? I think in the original printing of Runelords, one of the books has maybe it's the 6th book, has like a little sidebar about Xin-Shalast and mentions Karzoug's cloud giant apprentice Khalib. But later on you find Khalib and he's actually just a human. And yeah, I think the writers confirmed that he was originally planned to be a cloud giant, and then they realized that the giants were supposed to be kind of a slave race to the Thessalonians, so it felt weird for Karzoug to have a slave person as a apprentice, and yeah, they decided to just change it to make it another human. So very mild, slightly funny thing that exists. But in any case, he's got a lot of notes in his room. Easy to add more notes and fill in some lore that the party might have missed, especially stuff about the actual plan of what Karzoug is doing, about getting into and out of the Eye of Avarice, about any other creatures that might be in the Eye of Avarice with Karzoug, because he does have some. Yeah, it's just a chance to fill in a bunch of stuff there. And yeah, you can make Khalib as difficult or as easy as you want him to be. I would err a little bit on the easy side, but it's up to you. You don't want him to feel like he ended up being harder than the Karzoug fight, in my opinion. Okay, and then going into the Eye. Once the party reaches the Eye, they should really feel like going in is the end. Like, they're not going to get a second chance. They need to be as prepared as they possibly can be. They probably can't get back. The book actually doesn't ever explain why Karzoug can't just leave at any point, because the party goes in and then can just leave, it turns out, with using the root well. So why can't Karzoug? The book just kind of shrugs at that. I tried to think about it a little bit more, and the explanation that I came up with after sort of synthesizing it a little bit is that I make the excuse that going into the Eye of Avarice is somehow giving up your material body for some kind of like ageless, formless state, and that being in the Eye of Avarice itself is not really being alive. It's like being pseudo-alive, in a kind of a weird stasis in and of itself. And the reason Karzoug does this is because the Eye of Avarice is totally inaccessible from the outside world. He cannot be detected here. The only way to come in is through the sort of entry in the Pinnacle. So he doesn't have to worry about anything finding him here. He should be totally safe from Earthfall. He's just gone for a very, very aggressive plan that, I mean, it sort of worked. He was safe from Earthfall. He didn't die after all these 10,000 years. He hasn't gone crazy. But yeah, he is sort of trapped. So it should feel like he's kind of trapped here. The party going in should feel like they're sort of trapping themselves, in my opinion. So I say, in my mind, the party gives up their material body for a non-aging one in the non-aging existence in the eye, and coming back and regaining a real form requires an immense amount of energy. And for someone as powerful as Karzoug, that requires even more energy. It's like as you level up, it's like an exponential increase in energy. So given that he's like a level 27 or 26 character, he requires like orders of magnitude more energy than even a full party of level 20 characters, which they might be at this point. And in addition to that, I like the idea that Karzoug is actually using this energy to make his body even stronger than he was before. So he's actually like powering himself up. And part of the reason why he doesn't want to leave is because he's trying to max out his character, basically. He's waiting for the little meter to fill all the way up to the end. He's really trying to squeeze out every last ounce of energy he can before he comes back. Because once he comes back, it's going to be a huge pain in the ass to go back in there and get the rune well and everything. So he wants all the energy. So he's kind of doing it to himself a little bit. Like his greed is what's keeping him there, basically. But it's about to, like, he's almost done. He's literally days away. At this point, I actually set it so that when the party arrived at the Pinnacle, he was a day away, but every time they killed one of the projections, that added a day to his stay in the Eye. He's basically going to wait until he gets back all of his levels, and then he'll come out. And maybe that his negative levels wouldn't recover if he left the Eye early. So that can be kind of an interesting explanation as well. And yeah, if in order for the party to leave, they're going to have to activate the well themselves and steal that energy, split it amongst themselves, and return that way. And Khalib's notes or any kind of like research should be able to sort of reveal this information. Yeah, that's what I have to say about that. You could also just not even care. Maybe your party doesn't care. Maybe they'll just walk through. That's fine too. But again, I like to think about these things way too much. So, the final battle in the Eye of Avarice. This map is pretty complicated, especially if you just read the text. I think it requires some extra sort of drawing out. There's a lot of weird heights going on. It's not perfectly clear like where Karzoug starts, I think doesn't actually have a clear line of sight to where the players start. So it's a little bit funny. I think there's even some text where Karzoug like says some stuff before the encounter starts. Don't be afraid to like kind of move things around a little bit, but definitely have like a clear layout that you want. This map here is my version of it. Again, I've included it in the description Dropbox link. Feel free to steal mine if you want. Feel free to edit it and use your or base your own on it. There's also plenty of other people who've done their own versions of this map. There's so many. Actually, a thing I do here is, as the party is transitioning from going into the kind of eye portal and appearing here in the Eye of Avarice itself, I do kind of like a ghost image chat time with Karzoug, where I give the party a kind of a chance to just have a discussion with Karzoug in a space where they can't actually use their weapons. Nobody can cast spells, nobody can attack. They just, like, you reach for weapons, you can't grab them, you try to cast spells, you can't do them. It's just the whatever your party members are and Karzoug, and you just get to chat. And that gives you a chance to like have the kind of villain monologue if you want, have the party say their piece to him, have them do their whole spiel, get some RPing in, and then do the fight proper. That way you're not trying to cram all this stuff into the fight itself, and you don't feel bad about, well, Karzoug didn't get a chance to say his thing because they one-rounded him or something. So I think that's a pretty decent solution to managing that. I think it's important that Karzoug get to talk for this final encounter, and as a GM, I find it really hard to remember to have people talk during combat, because you're trying, especially big complicated combats like this, you're thinking about what spells do I cast, what things do I need to do on the next turn, how am I going to try and avoid various things. It's so much easier if you just kind of give a little bit of space for that. That's kind of outside of the encounter budget time to do that. Joey asks, what does the Paizo version of this map look like? I can show you. It's pretty similar. It looks like this. It's annoyingly rotated. Yeah, my version is like pretty identical to it. I just did a lot of marking for the individual spaces, or like the there's a lot of height differences going on. And yeah, their version just their maps tend to, or their older maps like this tend to not have a ton of detail on them. So I had a couple things like the kind of library behind him, the treasure pile. Actually, shoot, I should have brought it up here. But if you've ever seen the Game Mastery Guide for First Edition, there's actually a really nice picture of Karzoug and a blue dragon. That scene is actually this scene. It's him in the Pinnacle of Avarice on his throne with the blue dragon in front of his like library of books behind him. If you had flipped the camera around to the other side, you should be able to see, in theory, this big big honkin' fiery mass of energy, these like pillars of golden flame, etc. And actually, the background that I'm on, I can show it again at the end. It's the frame I start these slideshows on. That one I think is from the cover of Rise of the Runelords Anniversary Edition. I unfortunately have I don't think this version has it even as an interior cover. But there's like a shot of Karzoug fighting the party. And that's also supposed to take place in the same space. Is this a version of it too? There's another version of it in the book here. Kind of. This is a different shot, but it's supposed to also be in that same zone. It's very vague looking background there. I think the version in my picture here, oh yeah, you can kind of see over my shoulder here, that they have like a stone column, and they have a bunch of stone columns in the room. In the book, those are actually supposed to be pillars of like molten gold. So I think the artist missed the memo on what these pillars were. It happens all the time in Paizo books, where like you'll see a description for something and then you look at the art and the art doesn't actually match. And that's one of the cases. So yeah, definitely read the descriptions for the map, figure out what the hell is actually going on. Oh, that looks like my VTuber model for Karzoug. It is, or at least it's what I based the like angry face on. Can I bring up my VTuber model? Is this gonna work? Oh, I didn't. I can turn off my camera. I'm not gonna bother right now. Okay. But yes, I did base one of the frames of my little VTuber Karzoug off of that little angry lightning bolt eyes Karzoug that's in the book. But okay, other things about this combat. I wrote that the flame pillars should block direct shots to Karzoug. That's not 100% true. It's actually the rune well in the center that should be visibly blocking direct shots to Karzoug. There are flame pillars on the side. He can also kind of use those as sort of cover. If your party's got a lot of ranged magic, then you're probably going to want to use Karzoug's time stops on round one to put up a wind wall or a wall of force or some kind of wall spell to stop any like long range combat from getting to him. In general, he's I would, in second edition, I would give him 2 10th level spell slots like any other wizard should have at higher than 20th level. Rather than giving him Time Stop and Wish as he does in first edition, I would just give him 2 time stops. I think that's much more fun. The way he's written originally is to use Wish to basically kind of full heal his whole team when they get low. I think that's lame. I don't like healing. I don't like villains healing too much. And that just kind of extends the combat. I don't know if that's really that interesting. I would rather just have a second time stop. It's more fun. I use 1 time stop at the start to kind of set things up, and then I use a second time stop once anybody closes the gap to kind of change things and set up a new situation. He's also supposed to have... Ooh, I forget exactly what he has. I feel like he's just got like 3 Storm Giants or something. I swap at least one of them out for a Rune Giant, and I make the other 2 a Cloud and a Storm Giant. And then I keep the Dragon with him. I feel like that's enough variety. I also make them all like unique and upscaled so that they're more of a challenge. I probably could have made them even stronger than I did when I last ran it. I did feel like they were a little bit weak, but also once you defeat the Rune Giant, they're supposed to kind of give up, so they kind of get out of the fight anyway. So not a huge deal. And I have the Cloud Giant and Storm Giant off on the sides doing range attacks with the Rune Giant in the center, sort of blocking the kind of main entry. The Flame Pillars should make flying difficult, and they should all have like a pretty wide aura that deals like fire damage if the players get near them. They should require like acrobatics checks to fly around, or reflex saves to avoid getting fire damage. It's all stuff that can make the fight more interesting and prevent the party from just kind of flying and winning. A thing I did here was I actually made Karzoug's dragon be Mesmina, the savior of the Spared. In my headcanon, she actually returns to the Pinnacle after rescuing the Spared for one final encounter, or like a confrontation with Karzoug, at which point he permanently polymorphs her into a dragon and ends up taking her into the Eye as he goes in. And that makes for like an interesting... we had a character in our party who was very anti-dragon, but who was also very interested in the Spared and Mesmina stuff. So it just made for like an interesting story beat for when Karzoug mentions, like he calls the dragon by her name, and that just made the party go like, what? Mesmina? Is that the same? Like, it's interesting. I think it's cool. Otherwise, I think it's just like a nameless blue dragon. He's actually supposed to be able to just like make dragons out of the rune well for some reason. I don't know why that is. I think it's more interesting if it was just a dragon that came with him. But your mileage may vary. On to Karzoug's tactics. I already covered some of these, but you should really tailor Karzoug into playing against your party's preferred playstyle. His minions are largely just there to kind of hold the party back while he blasts stuff. They're not really there for damage. They're mostly just a distraction. Karzoug should basically be casting any buffs he can before the fight. He's aware the party's going to come. He knows when the party is kind of actively stepping up to the plate. So long duration buffs he should definitely have on, and then maybe he can have a couple of very short duration buffs, like 10-minute buffs, that he applies like as the party is approaching. He should probably have a round or two to do that. Or even 3 if you want. It doesn't really matter. The party's not going to know how he cast all these spells anyway. Maybe he stopped time. But yeah, I would throw a bunch of buffs on him. Make sure he's got plenty of active effects. He's a transmuter. He should be transmuting himself. I also gave him permanent shape change, the spell shape change. I didn't really get to use it because the party didn't... our party happened to kind of nuke him from afar, largely, and didn't get to really kind of scrap with him close range. But if you do have a party that is ready to scrap with him close range, then have him do a lot of spellcasting up front and then kind of shape change like rapidly through different forms I think is pretty cool if he's like certainly turning into like a purple worm and like a dragon and the devil and various other things. I think is pretty cool. That's what I planned to do last time. He didn't get to do it. The fight ended faster than I was able to interact with that. But it was there. And yeah, try to rely on transmutation spells. He's a transmuter. He's supposed to be a transmuter. Stick to things that change the properties of one thing to another. Try to give him, and I would give him stuff that's, gravity, space, time, are all, I think, relevant enough to his power set that it's fine if you just turn those into transmutation spells. For single target spells, stuff that I like, Disintegrate and Boil Blood, I think are pretty good just damage spells. Flesh to Stone and Baleful Polymorph are both pretty good if the party has any allies. They're not great against the party themselves because the party is probably high enough level for incapacitation to not really bother them. But it will probably work on any allies just fine. For AoE stuff, Chain Lightning, Fireball, Geyser, Meteor Swarm, Cloud Kill, all reasonable. Cloud Kill is better if you're able to do it in the kind of Wall of Stone. Cloud Kill I think is a funny combo. Forces the players to move if they're trying to turtle. I used it at the start of the last one to kind of get them to move, and they had expressed that they were like, oh, what if we just stand here at the start and or stand at the front and like don't let him get close to us and we'll just hide here and turtle up. And Karzoug can hear that. He's listening to them through also, if they have Sahedrons on, Karzoug can hear them. So Karzoug should kind of know what their plans are. Unless they were smart enough to take off the rings or figure out a way to communicate their plans without using their voices or something. So yeah, Karzoug should have a general idea of what they're planning and have some spells to get prepared for it. For defensive stuff, any of the wall spells are good. Wall of Stone is good just for physical blocking. Wall of Wind is basically blocks all arrows for free, with no checks involved. Wall of Force is just really annoying for a lot of characters. Even lots of like strong marshals can't really break through a Wall of Force very easily, so it's great to cut people off with. Prismatic Wall and Prismatic Sphere are both super annoying to deal with. Your party is very unless they know ahead of time that he's got these, they're very unlikely to have all of the kind of requisite counter spells to deal with it. So they're probably going to have to take some really painful damage and spell effects as they pass through the barriers. So very, very strong spell to give him. Maybe a little bit too strong. Shrug. Repulsion is also good if you can get it off. You might want to wait till the party gets closer because I think it's a sustain, so he's probably going to have to... I would give him whatever the quick concentration spell is that lets him get one free sustain around. I think that's pretty reasonable. Yes, Prismatic Sphere is very good for killing dogs. Indeed, indeed. And also, I gave him a homebrew version of Blood Money. It was a first edition spell. It was a transmutation sin spell that you could pick up if you read the Anathema Archive. I made it such that basically you exchange 1d6 spell or HP per spell rank that you're modifying, and you can use any meta magic as a free action, in addition to a couple of other effects. And I felt like that was a pretty good use of using kind of a free action Blood Money, cutting himself, blood transmuting into spell energy, and then quicken casting Disintegrate for one action. That's pretty epic. I think it's fun. And then his glaive. His glaive is supposed to be intelligent. I just sort of run it as a second character instead of trying to do any kind of minion management here. I just gave it a bunch of fire spells. I basically run it like a staff. I gave it a bunch of fire spells and some charges. I gave it a fire-themed version of heal that basically is just heal but with flames and removes burning effects, but it's not like he was going to be burning. And yeah, I think that's a pretty good way of handling it. The glaive is basically invulnerable, so it's a good kind of addition to the fight to kind of keep things... it keeps Karzoug dangerous because he's probably going to be out-actioned. That's basically the big advantage the party has in this fight, is that they have a lot of actions. Karzoug does not. unless Karzoug is able to very quickly shut people down, he's probably just going to get overwhelmed. Especially if a lot of party members have anti-greed weapons. If your party has more anti-greed weapons than just one, like my last party just had one, so he really just was focusing on shutting down one particular party member or avoiding one particular party member. In which case, it's sort of fine to have him, Karzoug, and the glaive be the only real threats on the field. The dragon a little bit, but the other minions not so much. But if you've got more anti-greed weapons, then you might want to have everyone beefed up a little bit just to be a bit hardier. Again, it's sort of up to you on how complicated you want this encounter to be, but I would go for lower minions, higher Karzoug, just because he's cooler than them. Okay. Once Karzoug is dealt with, you got to get out. And like I said before, I think getting out should mean activating the well. I think the way the book words it has to be the way out. I don't think it allows you to plane shift out. It doesn't really explain why this has to be the case, but again, we've talked about that. Make some excuses. Karzoug should have a bunch of notes, and he's got treasure and things. He's got a desk behind him. Like, the party should be able to research if they don't understand how to get out. If you're running short on time, you can just say that the party goes through his notes and finds the info. It doesn't need to be hidden behind any skill checks or anything. You can kind of just make it happen. Again, you're probably kind of at the end of a long session anyway. You probably just want to speed this part up. The actual activating of the well, I think by default in first edition, it does have a check for becoming blind when it activates, because it lets out this brilliant light. I like to add a couple. I would maybe modify how I did it this most recent time, but I also like to throw in. I try to do like 3 different saves. I did a Fortitude, Reflex, and a Will save. I forget what the Fortitude save was for. Maybe it was just for damage. I used the Reflex save for blindness to cover your eyes, and the Will save was for losing your memory. I think it's interesting to have kind of blindness and memory loss be like potentially on the table as side effects of like risking your life to go do this encounter. It's something that can leave the characters permanently changed as a result of doing this final battle. It adds a nice little bittersweet note to the ending if you're the sort of person who likes those. I like those. I would only make these effects permanent on a crit failure. I would make them a fairly high DC, but yeah, I think a crit failure would be like enough to make it permanent. But a regular failure should like result in some hours, like a couple hours of being blind or having lost your memory or something. I like to lose the memory of the campaign, basically. I think that's kind of interesting. But if you just got a regular fail, it should kind of go away afterwards and just kind of leave you a little bit like slightly lower visual acuity, slightly fuzzy memory about what happened, but you basically get most of your memories back. But if you fully crit fail, then you just lost it forever with a very, very high DC to recover it. And that can be kind of like that way the party doesn't just immediately go, oh, I just regenerated. Like, that would be a bit silly, right? That's not very permanent feeling. It should be the equivalent of like a 20th or 24th level effect or whatever that requires a lot of effort to remove. And yeah, then from there, right. If you've got a character that has died already in the final encounter, you might just want to skip that part. It should be a bittersweet enough ending as it is. You don't really need to add more of that. I think it's amusing, but yeah, mileage may vary. But after that, it's basically just epilogue time. Epilogue is however much you want to do with it. I like to do a relatively quick epilogue. I try to have a couple of things planned on. I think the first time I ran it, I had some ideas planned on like what each character would be doing in the epilogue, and like where they would be going and what would happen to them. Just kind of like a little brief thing. Or I just ask the players, like, what does your character do after the adventure? And that could be a fun little kind of wrap-up thing at the end. Or you can do a more extended wrap-up if you want. It's really up to you how you want to end the adventure. And yeah. Whew. I think that's it. That might be the longest one of these that I've done. I guess as it turns out, Spires of Xin-Shalast has a lot of content, huh? There's a lot of things going on, a lot of spellcasters to play with. 3 hours? Oh yeah, 253. Oof. I think that has been the longest one. Maybe I'm wrong. I could check the YouTube videos later, but... Oh, alright. I am really tired, actually. So, any questions before I end? Ugh. This is the longest, but only by about 20 minutes. All right, well, we can try to extend that with more questions. Save the questions for the epilogue talkback. Yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah, I think the plan is to, in a couple weeks, hopefully, we'll do a little mini epilogue for our own finishing of the campaign, and let the party ask me some questions directly. Let the man's rest, indeed. That's probably a good point. Yeah, my brain's mush, so... Okay. Thank you for joining me. If you are a GM and you've run adventures before, share what you've learned with the world, please. Make a YouTube video like this, make a forum post or Reddit post or something. I find it helpful when I'm running a campaign to see what other people have done. If you've got the time and energy to do it, I think it's worthwhile to do. There's so many people out there who are looking to play these adventures and looking to tailor them to their party, and they want to know what works, what doesn't work. This stuff is helpful, so definitely do it if you can. If you've got your own tips and tricks, feel free to add them below the video if you want. I'm sure somebody somewhere is probably going to see it at some point. Maybe they'll have maybe they'll learn something cool from what you did. Especially if you disagree with any of my tips. I've run this adventure twice, but I have not run it the many times that it has been run over the years by all these other different people in the world. So there's so many things to take into account that I can't possibly know, right? So and the other thing that I will leave you with is this came up to I was reading annoying Reddit threads today. In APs, it is totally fine to change things. The word of the AP is not law. Like, they write APs for what is largely like a lowest common denominator party. They have to assume kind of a generic approach to any given adventure that it might not work for your group. If you've got all spellcasters and no tank, then you want to adjust the encounters to account for that. If the AP keeps giving you shields as treasure and nobody in your party uses shields, don't put the shields in the treasure. Use a different treasure. It is totally fine to substitute, to modify, to alter these books to be however you want. You have my full blessing and permission to change literally anything about these adventures. You're not playing it wrong. You are not screwing it up. It's your job as the GM to tailor the experience to your group. And your goal is to make the most fun game possible for your team. And if that means dropping an encounter, adding an encounter, removing an encounter, changing an enemy's spell list, changing an enemy's tactics, changing an enemy's personality, do it. Just do it. Just do it. Just do it. Don't wring your hands over it. Just do it. It makes me so mad. Sorry, I'm ranting. Sorry, I might have missed this. Is anything in the game mechanically tied to how many minions of Karzoug the party kills in Book 6? Nope. The only thing the party needs is they're supposed to get enough Sahedron rings for everyone. I don't think anything else really matters. And if you allow greed weapons to bypass that, that's even fewer rings. And if you... Oh, I see. Sorry, you were worried about the whether or not killing the minions will bring him back faster. Lore-wise, yes. But mechanically, no. Yeah, the team spent a lot of effort working around it in an RPG perspective. That's exactly what I wanted. I tried to make it such that the party thought that somehow killing more greed, like that's the point in the lore, that killing greedy enemies is accelerating Karzoug's return. Wait, we roleplayed? Crazy. But there doesn't need to be a mechanic for it. Like, as long as your party's doing it, that's enough. And I felt like sometimes you can actually go out of your way to reward that if you want. I didn't have a really good way of doing that here. Like, if I had decided on a time limit, then maybe I could have altered the time limit based on how many enemies they killed or whatever. But yeah, I just didn't really have a good solution for that here. But it's the sort of thing that you definitely could reward if you had a clear idea on how it would work. It's always nice to play into player expectations, so long as it's not going to completely fuck the story. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I tried to feed the expectation that killing greedy enemies, was somehow making things potentially worse. But I also didn't want to actually prevent the player from just completing the objectives and killing the enemies. I thought it just made it more interesting from like a story and roleplay perspective, that I think it's fun when the party has to try to not kill every single person they see, or when they have to sometimes non-lethal and subdue and try to convince enemies to stand down. I think those are all interesting encounter types that aren't just the kill all enemies. I'm a big fan of Fire Emblem, and any time a Fire Emblem game is entirely defeat all enemies for every single map, I find that very boring. I want additional objectives. I like additional objectives. I think that's cool. So it doesn't really have to be a reward for more objectives. It can, as long as you think it is, it's good enough. All right, I think I'm going to end it there. If you're on the stream, I'll still be around for a little bit after, while I remux the episode. But if you're not on the stream, tough luck. Farewell. Thank you all for listening to my silly rants. Hope you enjoy, and hopefully I get to do another one of these for the next AP once I get around to that. So, farewell. If you don't end up catching up on third action, fuck you. Bye.